In the next few pages, you detail actions you've taken to, amongst other things, bring evidence before this commission.
Correct.
And I understand the reason that this evidence is being advanced by you is to deny, in effect, any allegations that you have been deliberately delaying your cooperation or managing your cooperation. And for that purpose, you're going to lead evidence now about the steps you've taken leading up to your appearances before the Commission.
That is correct, Chair.
So would you take the Chair through that, please?
Chair, originally in 2016, I actually had spoken to Brian Biebuck, and I'd spoken to him all along that I was concerned. And then during 2017 and 2018, I worked directly with the Hawks, the Commercial Crimes Unit that was located in Versaghi Street. And I dealt with a certain detective, Joey Tijani. I also gave them a complete case file of what I'd prepared, and I'd handed it over to them. That also included some threats that had been received, because I'd taken the threats very seriously. Nothing ever happened. I never heard anything. I then, out of desperation, phoned up Advocate Glynis Breitenbach, and she met me one evening at the Sheraton Hotel with another doctor, I can't remember who, and she told me the process to follow, and then she had meetings with me at my house. I then met with, acting on her advice, I met with an attorney who was helping me at that stage called Gerard Wagenaar, who was located in Pretoria, who thereafter contacted people from the Hawks and the NPA, as well as people from the Commission. But I'd already contacted the Commission as well. I also then had a meeting with Advocate Wully Hofmeyer at his offices in order to get urgent assistance, and because at that stage he was the one who had done the SIU report. And I wanted assistance in regards to the corruption case that had been opened against Bosasa 10 years ago. And I wanted help. I then I got a telephone number of Reverend Stimela from the Commission in about August 2018, and I sent him a message. So concerned that I tried absolutely everything to seek advice on how to deal with the whistleblowing, I had no option but to actually reach out. And I then drafted a press release that I wanted to mention this to everybody and request, that I whistleblow, and that the people that need to whistleblow, because things had escalated with threats and all that type of thing. So an email was sent to various anti-corruption organizations as well as to various state departments as well that deals with issues of this nature. And then an article emanating from the brief was posted on News 24. A copy of this was attached to my initial affidavit. I then received a call from Colonel Lazarus from the Hawks during September, October 2018, and that was after the press release of the 21st of August 2018. I indicated at all times that I would avail myself for a meeting, which then took place in the chambers of Advocate Roux. At the meeting, we discussed the assistance and how we could assist putting this whole matter together. And I think the one thing that came out of the meeting was that, they need assistance to tie up the loose ends, and there were 600 lever arch files that needed to be dealt with. So I was personally at the meeting. Mr. Andries van Tonder was with me at the meeting. Gerard Wagenaar was present at the meeting, and we offered assistance there. I was also in contact with my previous attorney, Gerard Wagenaar, who informed me that he's working on this matter, and this is back to August. And he would meet the relevant authorities in this regards. But what was very concerning to me was he was meeting the authorities and I wasn't there. So on the 22nd of November, and I want to give you a bit of a prelude to why everything was so rushed. 22nd of November, I told Mr. Wagner that I was terminating his services, and he then undertook to provide me with a statement to provide to State Capture. I agreed, but in the meantime I'd arranged with my present attorneys, Advocate Manny Witz and Attorney Daniel Witz from Witz Incorporated to come on board. And I immediately informed the authorities thereof, as well as Captain Lazarus, Lazarus and Brigadier Makanyani as well. On the 9th of January, when Mr. Wagner returned from leave, I was promised a statement, an affidavit. Chair, I felt that this had been delaying, and I had a meeting across the road at Hillside House with Mr. Wagner and with his legal assistant, myself and Mr. Fantonda, and I reiterated again that he had promised both myself and the Commission affidavits, and nothing was forthcoming. I raised my discontent with him, and I explained to him that it's starting to make it look as if I don't cooperate with the Commission. So it looks bad on me, and on Andries, and on the other whistleblowers. And furthermore, it puts me in a predicament where people think that perhaps I'm trying to withhold information, which was not the case. Eventually, he conceded that it was his fault. And I just want to put on the record, Chair, that I paid him up front for everything. I then requested that they send the information on no less than 3 emails, as well as requests from the investigators to provide me all the documentation I'd given to him. The answer was no, unless I give a letter confirming that I will not hold him liable for anything. To date, notwithstanding all those requests made, telephonic, emails, everything, nothing's been forthcoming. That information was the only information I had at my disposal. Some of them included discs and that. I explained in depth that the documents I needed to be given to the Commission and to the State Capture investigators, and I made sure that Colonel Heap and Frank Dutton were aware of this. I've handed over everything that I possess that might have some information, including my laptops, my iPads. I've asked the Commission to hold everything that I've given over, including documents, in their possession until such time as the Hawks require such. They can then take over. I've also assisted SARS and the liquidators with regards to the investigation on African Global, because there's been a lot of removal and destroying of documentation that has taken place, and it is a concern. I actually I'm concerned about it because the more documentation that goes missing, the less we have to be able to uncover everything. In order to help the Commission as well, I even went as far as providing them with a 360-degree photographic view of the office park and the various offices where everything is kept. I've related the reason, I've also provided the investigations team with their servers access codes that I had at that stage. And I've also related, I've given absolutely everything over that I can. All I have right now is the brain that can remember things. I've related the above events in detail so that any allegations that I'm holding back is refuted. My intention was to come here and provide the Commission with a full detail and everything to my recollection. I also wish to state that even when I became aware of and I had personal knowledge of the corrupt activities being conducted, I was so involved with the complete culture, and I mentioned in the beginning when I started, of the cult that was taking place, that I failed to report these. I'm not at once admonishing the fact that I also benefited. I received holidays, I had a good lifestyle. And yeah, I just wanted to be frank with you, Chair.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Agrizzi. Now, you have just mentioned, and you did mention yesterday too, that there is still information or documents that you have been wanting to get,
Yes.
which you haven't got. Now, are the investigators of the commission aware of the documents that they are aware of the documents that you want to have but haven't been able to have? Have they given assistance in trying to get those documents, or what is happening?
The investigators have been extremely assistive. They've really gone out of their way. I've given them names of people,
Yes.
telephone numbers, contact numbers, a list,
Yes.
everything.
Yes.
They have
Yes.
gone. They're busy working through it.
Yes.
But I think it's a long and a tedious process.
Yes.
But I do think that the time needs to come eventually when there'll be a search and seizure warrant,
Yes.
and I can actually sit with everybody
Yes.
and with a team that was involved
Yes.
and piece together
Yes.
everything. So,
Yes.
they have been assisting, but I
Yes.
understand
Yes.
that they've got a lot on their plate.
No, that's fine. I will talk to the head of the legal team, Mr. Pretorius, and the head of the investigation team, Mr. Nombembe, to find out if there are any challenges and to see that everything is done to make sure that documents that would be helpful to this commission that you are aware of are obtained. Okay. Thank you very much.
Mr. Agrizzi, from paragraph 50 onwards, you deal with Mr. Cedric Frolick and evidence relevant to your dealings with him or what you know about his dealings in relation to Bosasa. Would you relate those to the Chair, please?
Chair, Cedric Frolick was first introduced to me by Cheeky Watson. It was telephonically during a period when there was a lot of attack from the media. He's been a long-standing friend of Cheeky Watson and the Watsons. And at that stage, he phoned me to tell me that Cedric Frolick would be visiting the office park with a certain other gentleman. I didn't know who at that stage until Gavin Watson came and told me what the purpose of the meeting was. And the purpose of the meeting was basically to visit and to showcase the Mahale Business Park, as it was called then, to the two gentlemen, so that they could understand the magnitude of the business and see the diversity of the actual business in the business park and how a quasi-BEE company was performing in terms of development in Southern Africa. Gavin stressed to us that Cedric Frolick would be instrumental in assisting to cross the impasse that had been developed with Vincent Smith. So,
Just remind the Chair, please, what position did Vincent Smith hold at that stage?
Vincent Smith was, at that stage, if I recall correctly, was the chairman of the Portfolio Committee on Correctional Services and Justice. So he would be able to, he believed that he was the chair of chairs, and he had a very good relationship with Vincent Smith. He was from Port Elizabeth, and he would be able to assist in sorting out this problem that they had with Vincent Smith.
And
Vincent Smith at that stage was very anti-Bosasa. He did not want to even meet with Bosasa.
Yes, carry on, please. Did a visit take place?
Yes, the visit took place.
Who went and where did you go?
Well, what happened was I got a last-minute call to tell me that a gentleman by the name of Buti Kompela was visiting as well, and that he was disabled and that we needed to make special arrangements. So I had to arrange a golf cart, because a normal tour that I used to do around the office park with Gavin Watson would take 4.5 hours. So it was a lot of walking and a lot of getting into offices and out of offices. So I made special arrangements. I can't remember exactly. I seem to recall that I had to book the flights as well for the gentleman coming up. I recall that before we saw the visitors off, we took them on the whole office park tour, had lunch with them in the diner as always. It was decided in a meeting, we sat in the boardroom, it was myself in the boardroom, Gavin Watson, if I recall correctly, one or two of the directors were in and out, but the meeting really centered around myself, Gavin Watson, Mr. Buti Pella, Mr. Cedric Frolick. And at one stage, there was a discussion that ensued, and we were discussing the way forward on how to deal with Vincent Smith. And I recall that I had to draft a document and get a document ready, and Cedric Frolick would arrange with Mrs. Bailey. I remember the name. I had a school teacher at the same name, so I remember that name. Mrs. Bailey to meet with Vincent Smith at the Parliamentary offices. So I had to draw up this document and get it ready and showcase on the benefits of having outsourced correctional services and justice to Vincent Smith. The formal introduction letter was done, and it was to be used as a cover on the existing portfolio. So it was quite a thick document, very similar to this file.
May I ask you at this stage, Mr. Frolick and Mr. Pella,
yes,
they were invited to see this park, this business park.
Correct.
So that they would do what with that information?
My understanding was that they must see the benefit that BOSASA has produced and BE working, so that they could take that information and they could talk from a position of knowing and a position of understanding what BOSASA was about.
Talk in Parliament, at the Portfolio Committee, or talk where?
Convince Vincent Smith.
Or the purpose was that they could then talk to Mr. Vincent Smith and convince him that, in effect, BOSASA was not such a bad company.
Correct, and explain what they had seen.
And explain what they had seen.
So that they could win him over, because Vincent Smith at that stage was extremely anti-BOSASA.
Yes, yes.
And I wouldn't say he had right to be.
Yes, yes.
So he was standing up for what was right.
Yes, yes. So the purpose was so that they could use this information to convince him or persuade him to change his attitude towards BOSASA.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Correct. So there was a specific time when we were discussing it and debating it.
Maybe I could also ask, do you know whether the two men who made this visit were part of the Portfolio Committee on Correctional Services together with Mr. Smith, or were they not involved in that committee?
Not as far as I know.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right. It was specifically at that meeting as well when I drew up the letter of introduction, and I remember asking the question, Gavin, do you want to sign it? Because in every single letter that went out in the company to a client or a potential client was always signed by two people, always whitey and a darky, or it depends your audience, if it's to Parliament. And I asked him, I said, Gavin, are you going to sign it? Because I don't want to sign it alone, because it's going to look, yeah, you're talking about a BE company and I must sign the letter. Are you going to sign it? And who else, Joe or Papa? He said, no, you get Gibson and Genje to sign it. Gibson and Genje was then, for a very short period, the chairman of BOSASA. He wasn't actively involved with the business at all, but he was there as the figurehead.
Okay.
So I was told, no, you get him to sign it. Gavin Watson was specific. He said, I don't want to compromise myself with the other ANC people to be seen as trying to, what's the right word, to try and impose myself on Vincent Smith.
Yes.
So that's why I was told Gibson and Genje will sign it. And I was also told, because I didn't want to go to the meeting, I don't like those type of meetings. I didn't want to go to the meeting, but Gavin said, I have to go to the meeting because he's, how do I put this politically correct? Let me not go there. In other words, the mix had to be right. That's the right way to maybe put it. That Gibson and Genje, but also that I was there to showcase and to explain the company, which was very strange for me because Normally, they would utilize Papa Leshabani or Joe Gumedi as a spokesperson to go and propose this thing, but he insisted that I go and that Gibson goes.
I'm sorry, and the mix you're talking about is the racial mix of the composition of those who would represent Bosasa at the meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
Did Gavin Watson ever address Cedric Frolick directly in relation to any influence over Vincent Smith?
Yes, he did.
What was said?
Well, there was a specific meeting, a specific time in the meeting where Gavin Watson told Cedric to do whatever's possible to ensure that we could win over Vincent Smith, or alternatively, to try and move him out of that position so that he couldn't be detrimental to Bosasa and the contract. So it was during this discussion, and I remember vividly Mr. Pella, because he was walking on a crutch, I had to open the door for him because he wanted to take a call, and he was standing at the door, well, halfway in the door, so he was on his phone, and I was holding the door open. I remember that vividly. Whilst we were discussing this approach to Vincent Smith, Gavin then excused himself. So he had the discussion, excused himself. Now the boardroom is located right next to the vault. He excused himself, walked out, went to the vault, and then came back. Anything? Must I continue?
Just carry on. What did you see then?
So when he came back from the vault, I stayed when he was in the vault, I stayed in the boardroom with Mr. Cedric Frolick and Mr. Pella, and Gavin returned, and he called him. He said, come here. And they were in the passageway, and there was, those years, double doors. And I could see through the door, and he had opened his jacket pocket, and he put a security bag in the pocket. And, you know, it's obvious. I knew exactly what was in the security bag, and it was some money.
Who put the security bag in whose pocket?
Watson put it in Frolick's pocket.
In Mr. Frolick's
Yes.
Jacket pocket?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You referred to a security bag, and you referred in your earlier evidence, particularly when the video was being shown, to security bags.
Yes.
Were they the same?
Same thing.
Right. And you say in paragraph 61 that Gavin Watson always reiterated that everything possible had to be done to deal with Vincent Smith. Just tell the chair about that, please.
At that stage, Vincent Smith was the thorn in the flesh. He was the person that would contra anything that Bosasa had done. He would raise issues with regards to Bosasa. He was a major concern. And he was actually at that stage doing what was right. All these questions, all these points were very, very valid.
And around about what year are we talking about here? I see in your statement
2010, around there, I think. I can't recall the exact dates.
Yes.
Once I start getting all the
documents,
emails and that,
yes.
then I can start finding the exact dates.
Yes.
And what I will do is I'll do a full timeline
Yes.
for the Commission.
Yes, thank you very much.
There was a time, you will recall, when Advocate Willie Hofmeyer addressed the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee in
That's
relation to the SIU report
That is correct.
existed at the time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That was around 2009.
Correct.
These events of which you speak here, when in time did they relate to the SIU revelations before the Parliamentary Committee?
Probably 2010, around 2009, 2010, 2011.
Yes. And I recall that there was some opposition to Mr. Smith allowing Mr. Hofmeyer to address the Parliamentary Committee. Is that correct?
Most definitely. There were emails and letters that were sent to the State Attorney, to Willie Hofmeyer's office, to try and prevent that from happening.
All right. Carry on, please.
Before they left, I debriefed Gavin Watson on the discussions that when he left...
I'm sorry, Mr. Pretorius. I don't know if I've missed something, but I would like to know why there were attempts to prevent him. I don't know if you are going to cover that with him.
Let's just take that step by step. At around the time of which you're now speaking in your evidence, Vincent Smith, as chair of the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee, would presumably have been instrumental in allowing Willie Hofmeyr to present to the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee.
It was about the same time.
The topic of the presentation would be the SIU report into Bosasa,
Correct.
which had also reached public domain at around that time.
Correct.
And certain people were not happy about Willie Hofmeyr being allowed to speak to the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee about the contents of the SIU report and the allegations contained in that report.
That is correct.
Who were those parties and what did they do?
I would have to go into my records. I don't think I mentioned it. I didn't actually. I know what you're talking about.
Yes.
Advocate Pretorius is reminding me of something now, but there were people that were very unhappy. I remember that together with Brian Beebuck, we authored a letter to various people, and at one stage we were going to bring an application. I can't remember if that was ever done, to the State Attorney and to Willie Hofmeyr, not to present any detail.
So essentially, what you're saying, as I understand it, is that Bosasa, in a general sense, wasn't very happy about this presentation before the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee, chaired by Mr. Smith.
No, most definitely not.
And Bosasa, or people connected with Bosasa, were some of the people who were trying to prevent Mr. Willie Hofmeyr from making a presentation to the Portfolio Committee.
Chair, there were letters sent to and fro.
Yes.
And as soon as I get access, I will get those letters to you.
Yes, okay, thank you.
You were telling the chair, Mr. Agrizzi, about your debriefing of Gavin Watson after he had left the boardroom, or of events that occurred after he had left the boardroom.
Yes, Chair. So after every meeting, we'd have to sit and debrief each other, or I would have to brief him on what was said whilst he was in the vault. And I basically said to him, look, we had small chat and small talk. I didn't want to discuss anything without him there. And I explained to him that, Cedric Frolick was really impressed and Mr. Pella was really impressed with the office park and what we're doing. That was basically the debrief. And he also then told me explicitly that Cedric Frolick, I don't need to worry about. Because I would always question, who is the person? Where does he fit in? Can he help? And he would say to me, don't worry about it. He's 100% on board.
That Cedric Frolick is 100% on board.
Correct. He mentioned he had been with the family for years. He dealt with Chiki and he dealt with Valence as well.
I remember that when I was reading your statement, I got the impression that what you were saying was that when Mr. Gavin Watson gave the security bag to Mr. Frolick, Mr. Pella was still on the phone. You must just confirm if my understanding is correct. I got the impression that he might not have seen what was happening. I don't know. I just want you to...
If you look at the boardroom at that stage was shaped in a U. So there were two wooden double doors that opened up to the boardroom. And I always sit near the coffee station, which was on the opposite side. Mr. Pella was sitting at the head of the table where Gavin was sitting, and it was, I can't remember when Gavin put the, he didn't, I doubt he saw it, but I can't remember if he was on the phone or not.
Okay.
He might have just got off the phone.
Okay.
But Gavin had come back, but before Gavin walked into the boardroom, he was at the door and he called Cedric Frolick out.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Would you relate the evidence in paragraph 63, please?
The one thing I remember standing outside as they were being picked up by the driver to take them back to the airport. I remember vividly that Gavin said to me that we have to remember every month we have to arrange 40,000 rand that must be delivered to Cedric Frolick. He says this would be a standard arrangement, and Watson would arrange to take it with him whenever he went down to PE, or he would give it to his brother, Valence, to take down for him to PE as well. So I asked him, but, how are you going to take this on a plane through security, How do you take 40,000 rand? It's not massive, it's maybe 4 bundles of money. How are you going to take this through the plane? And, he says, he just laughed at me. He says, don't worry, they never check. And I always get the Basasa guys, when Gavin would arrive at the airport, would surround him and carry his bag and everything. And there was such a lot of people around him that nobody really worried to check his bags.
Were there any other benefits of which you have knowledge?
Chair, I managed to get from one of the whistleblowers that are still inside, they had a copy of an invoice and an email that was sent to me by Dr. Jurgen Smith, where Chiki had sent him the invoice for Cedric Frolick, and he had said to him that Chiki had called him and said, Basasa must pay for this as well. There are others, but we need to get them, and it's a process. But I'm sure the investigation team will assist. So yes. Attached there was a small invoice for 2,744 rand, and it was for City Lodge, and it was dated the 14th of September 2010. And the reference there was VHR 25856, guest Frolick, Mr. C. And it's attached, I think it is. Is
so
it
next to KK, let's
KK,
go to page 118, please. On the 14th of December 2010, it's apparent that there was an email sent from Dr. Smith to yourself, subject line invoice from Sure Blake's Travel Agency Pty Limited. And the email reads, Angelo Chiki told me that this invoice must also be paid by Basasa. Please advise, Doc. Was that invoice paid?
Yes.
And if one goes to page 119, one will see the invoice. It's actually an invoice made to EP Rugby, care of Mr. D. Watson.
That's correct.
For accommodation at the City Lodge, OR Tambo.
That's correct.
Did EP Rugby pay that invoice?
No, Basasa paid all the invoices with relation to travelling for Mr. Cedric Frolick and Mr. Pella. I just need to get all the other invoices. Although it shows EP Rugby, it was Chiki Watson would book stuff on Basasa, and this was one of them.
Chiki Watson is Daniel Watson.
Daniel
Mr.
Watson.
D. Watson.
He's the one that arranged that Cedric Frolick and Pella.
The invoice at page 119 on your evidence was paid by Basasa.
That's correct. You'll see the email. The email is from Dr. Smith, and it says clearly there, that Chiki said to him, this must be paid for Basasa, because it was Basasa's, he did work for Basasa.
You relate an incident in paragraph 65 that occurred shortly after the events of which you've just spoken.
Correct.
Tell the chair about that, please.
Shortly after this visit and that, I was informed by Gavin that I needed to go to his brother in Port Elizabeth, and I had to meet with Valence Watson, and I also needed to take a parcel of cash which he'd given to me, which was 40,000 rand. And I remember because I was very nervous about going through an airport with money. So it was specifically in 200 rand notes, and it was a small package so it could fit in my briefcase. I did what I was told to do. Stupidly, I went and I took the package with me, and I then hired a vehicle. No, I didn't hire a vehicle, Chair, sorry, I didn't. I then took the package, got into the vehicle, I was collected, taken to Valence Watson's house in Waverley. I think it was in I can't remember, it's Waverley something.
Would that be the suburb, name of the suburb or something? Or is that a complex?
The name
can't
Waverley is
remember.
in my mind.
Yes.
I'll find the exact address, but
Yeah, okay.
I remember the house vividly, though. It was
Yes.
beautifully stone built,
Yes.
stone, and he mentioned to me that he actually had got an Italian craftsman to help him with the stone work and that. So I remember the house
Yes.
vividly. And we were actually waiting at one stage to see Mr. Frolick.
Yes.
And he took me and he showed me an old gym, and a gym that he had built, and he said he never ever used the gym. It was a beautiful place. And then Cedric Frolick arrived.
So that was Mr. Chiki Watson's residence?
No, Valence Watson.
Oh, okay, thank
Valence
you.
Watson. I recall that while I was waiting, he showed me the gym, as I mentioned to you, and then Cedric Frolick arrived at Valence's house. We sat in the lounge. I remember we sat upstairs in his lounge. His wife came and said goodbye. She was going out, and he made us coffee and gave us some coffee. And they started talking about political issues that had happened in Port Elizabeth over that period. There was some, I didn't really pay attention. I was on my phone checking emails. I tried to stay away from getting into the discussion. Then he started talking about the strategy on how to handle Vincent Smith and what we needed to do.
And do you recall more or less how long after Mr. Frolick's and Mr. Compella's visit to the business park it was when you traveled to Port Elizabeth for this purpose?
Chair, I'd like to get all my records
Yes.
to establish, but it wasn't long. It was about 10 days.
Okay. So would that have been the first payment after the visit?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
So I gave that to Valence Watson.
The package you're talking about?
Yes.
With cash?
Correct. So,
But just to go back,
yes.
what had, you did say this, but I just want to make sure I understand. What had Mr. Governor Watson, who did he say this money that you had to carry to Port Elizabeth was for?
I'm going to give it to Valence to give to Cedric. He said
Okay.
Valence knew about it.
Yes, okay.
So I gave it to Valence, and he knew about
So
it.
you were not going to, you were not to give it to Mr. Frolick yourself.
No.
You had to give it to Mr. Valence Watson.
And he was going to give it to Cedric Frolick.
Okay, all right.
Okay. So I gave it to him, and later I saw him give it to him. I think it was about when we were about to leave. He actually
Yes.
took the package and he said, well, "This is yours."
Yes. Was this in a security bag?
Yes.
Yes.
It was in the same bag. It wasn't
Yes.
opened. I didn't open it or anything. I
Yeah,
just
so
gave
you-
it as it was, handed it over.
So you gave it to Mr. Valence Watson,
Correct.
and at the time when you were about to part, you saw Mr. Valence Watson give the same packet to Mr. Frolick.
Chair, I sat on a leather couch. There was a Persian carpet in front of me. My briefcase was next to me. As I arrived, I took it out, I gave it to him, and he put it on another chair
Yes,
where he was sitting.
yes.
All right. Then he got up, he made coffee, came back, we had the discussion. When we left, he took it as we were walking out of the lounge. He gave it to him.
Okay, thank you.
He took the bag and gave it to Cedric Frolick.
Yes.
Who had packed money into that bag? Was it you or was it somebody else?
No, it was Gavin Watson.
And in your presence or not in your presence?
No, it wasn't in my presence, but I
Yes.
did tell him, please don't make it hundreds or 50 rand notes because I've got to carry this rubbish through the
Yes.
thing. And Chair, when you've
Yeah.
been seeing that stuff for as long as I have, you know exactly how much is there.
Yes, okay.
So 20,000 rands, 200 rand notes are packed 100, so it's 20,000 rand. It's 2 packs next to each other.
Yes, thank you.
What happened within the next week?
Within a week of that meeting, Gavin got a call from Cedric Frolick to say that I must accompany, Gavin then came to me and said, I must accompany Gibson and Genje. We must fly down, all right, the day before for an introductory meeting with Vincent Smith.
Fly down to where?
To Cape Town.
For what purpose?
Because there was going to be a meeting with Vincent Smith the following day.
Okay.
And who was to coordinate this visit?
It would be coordinated by Cedric Frolick.
And were you requested to make any preparations for the visit?
Well, I'd already sent booklets down, and I don't mention it in my thing, but I'd already sent a package down, but I brought with exactly the same package, with the same letter, to be handed over to him. It was a box with the Bosasa logos on it, and it was all the portfolios of the company inside, as well as a video of the benefits of having Bosasa there.
Did you travel to Cape Town?
Yes, we did.
Were you accompanied by anybody?
As far as I remember, myself and Mr. Njenje flew down together. We stayed in the same hotel. I hired a vehicle, and we stayed in a hotel that is a beautiful hotel, but normally close to Parliament, where all the politicians stay when they come down. Very, very nice, really top-class hotel. I can't remember the name, though.
Would there be any records of this visit?
At the hotel?
Of the flights, car hire, and the like?
Yes, most definitely.
Who were they charged to?
They were charged to Bosasa.
And who organized the travel arrangements?
If I remember correctly, the travel person at that stage was a lady by the name of Magdal Wilson.
At
She would
Blake's
have
Travel?
arranged it. But, sorry?
At Blake's Travel?
Yes. No, she worked for Bosasa. At Blake's Travel, Brian Blake would be able to pull that information for us, as well as SAA. If they have a subpoena, they will be able to pull all the records. And I'd be able to tell you exactly which hotel it was, how much we had to pay, and all that type of thing. It was always a direct bill back, so I never used the company credit card there.
Did the meeting with Vincent Smith eventuate?
Yes, well, I'd actually had breakfast with Gibson and Genje, where we discussed how we're going to approach this. And I don't want to implicate him because he did nothing wrong, but he's very knowledgeable as well. So he stood back a bit. He didn't actually participate in the
discussion.
In the discussion with me. I just briefed him. I said, well, you're just here really to follow me, to make me look, dilute my whiteness. That's what basically it was. So at the time, you could see he wasn't comfortable with it, but he was doing it because Gavin had asked him to do it. So what happened then was we were taken through the security process in Parliament. There's a scanner. We walked through the scanners, and we signed in. Cedric Frolick met us in front of Parliament there, and he took us through, and he put us in an office to wait. And we had to wait in the specific office. I don't think it was the office of Vincent Smith, because it was empty. It was like a meeting room, but with a desk and a chair and all that. And I remember we sat in there for quite a while before Cedric Frolick brought in Vincent Smith. And he walked in, and he was visibly annoyed that we were there. And it was about...
Was he not expecting you?
No, I don't think he was.
Oh.
Chair, either he was expecting somebody else, or he was expecting that Cedric Frolick had maybe brought Gibson and Genje there, but I don't think he expected to see me there. I'd never met him before, so I actually Googled him to find out a bit about him on the web. But he was very abrupt. I basically said to him, here's a document with an introduction, and I tried to explain to him, and he said, look, I'm busy. I've got a meeting now. I have to leave. And he left. And it was a bit embarrassing because the meeting actually didn't go well at all.
Did it look like his attitude towards us had not changed
Most
as
definitely
at that
not.
time?
most definitely not.
Yes, okay.
So I left the company brochures with him. I gave them to him. What he did with them, I don't know. Then Cedric Frolick basically took us on a brief tour of the building itself, and I bumped into one or two people who confirmed that they saw me there. A specific incident that I remember was, we had lunch in the canteen. They have lovely food there. And we had lunch in their canteen, and he put it on his card, Mr. Frolick, for the lunch for myself, himself, and Gibson and Ginger. So we sat openly with all the parliamentarians, MPs sitting around us. So it was quite impressive. And then he basically showed us the assembly, showed us a couple of empty spots and that. And after that we left, we flew back.
But you only saw and spoke to Mr. Frolick after you had had this brief encounter with Mr. Vincent Smith. I'm saying encounter because I'm not sure whether it ended up being a meeting or not.
It wasn't a meeting. It was an introduction.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be a meeting. It didn't go there.
But my question is whether you, on that day, you only saw Mr. Frolick after and not before the meeting.
No. He fetched us from the
hotel
entrance.
We
phoned him and he fetched us from the entrance.
Of Parliament.
We went through the security with him.
Yes.
And then he took us, we had to still sign in the book.
Yes.
And he took us through, and we walked a little bit around Parliament, and then he took us to a specific office.
Yes. And left you there.
And he said, just wait here. And myself and Gibson and Ginger waited there. And then we waited quite a while, and I was briefing Mr. Ginger on what documents I'd prepared, so that he knew in case for this meeting that we were going to have. And then when Cedric Frolick came back with Mr. Vincent Smith, he was with him, and he was very abrupt.
So when Mr. Vincent Smith came into that office, he was with Mr. Frolick?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
And then at the lunch, I didn't want to embarrass Mr. Frolick by saying, this meeting didn't happen, didn't go very well. We've just wasted 25,000 Rand on traveling, and, we've wasted our time and your time. And he said, no, don't worry, this is how politicians are. He said, but at least we're starting to break the ice.
But I'm not sure whether with that very brief encounter and the attitude of Mr. Smith that ice had been broken.
I was worried because I had to go back and report to Mr. Watson what had happened. I'd have to phone him as soon as I'd left the office. And I said to Gibson and Ginger, I said, I don't know if I can tell Gavin that this was a good meeting. Because everybody, when they have meetings, will say, no, it was a brilliant meeting. I said, no, this wasn't a very good meeting,
Yes.
But a specific incident comes to mind, Chair, and that was, I remember I was sitting in the boardroom with another meeting, and Gavin called me out of it, and he said, by the way, I'm meeting with the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development.
More or less, when did this meeting take place?
I remember there was a conference in Port Elizabeth.
Your voice sometimes goes down.
Sorry, Chair.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
Yes.
There was a conference in Port Elizabeth. My dates, I'm terrible with dates. There was a conference in Port Elizabeth. It must have been, it was recent. It was about 2015, around there. So there was a conference in PE, and Gavin called me out the boardroom meeting. It was actually one of my HOD meetings, so I'll be able to check the date when I get my notes. And he called me out and he says, listen here, sorted. And he said, the Lord works in mysterious ways. He said, he told me about that there was a ANC meeting or rally or something in Port Elizabeth, and Cedric Frolick was going to help him organize the accommodation for Masuta, and he'd be able to have a meeting with
That's
Masuta.
Minister Masuta.
Minister Masuta. So I said, well, that's great. I mean, you know, you've been wanting to see him for a long time. You haven't been able to get to him. Senior Sir Pella couldn't get a meeting going with Minister Masuta and Gavin Watson. So it would be, he explained to me exactly what had happened, that Cedric Frolick had offered Minister Masuta accommodation in one of, they have a property down there called like a game reserve, wildlife estate, where you can build houses. And I'm not sure if it was there specifically, I can't exactly remember, but what from Gavin told me is that it was one of his houses down there that he had actually arranged that Minister Masuta could stay at. Because the argument was that Cedric Frolick, who had been organizing the accommodation and everything for the parliamentarians and the politicians, or the politicians from the ANC, would say to him, no, everything's full, there's no space, and we'll get you, I've got a special place for you. And that meeting then, he stayed in the house, and the meeting then took place. Gavin told me exactly how he had planned it, and I remember it because even the next day he had gone to Richmond MT with myself, and he had explained in detail how he's going to, very similar to the discussions he had on recording, where he talks about how he's going to handle the meeting with ex-President Zuma. He explained that as well to MT, that, you know, that he can sort this out. He's going to have a meeting with him, breakfast, and then after breakfast, you know, then it'll be sorted out. He'll develop that relationship. And he was excited about it. He was extremely excited. Gavin was like a kid with new toys if he got to meet a parliamentarian or a politician. So that happened, and it was reported on the press as well.
But I just want you to go back a little bit, because yes. I seem to hear you say something like that is Mr. Gavin Watson, and or Mr. Frolick, kind of planned.
That is correct.
To make sure that politicians or ANC people would be made to believe that there was no accommodation, it was full, and then end up be offered accommodation at provided by Busasa or by Mr. Gavin Watson. Is my understanding of what you are saying correct?
You're 100% correct.
Yes.
I'm telling you what, I didn't see them caucus this.
Yes, but
I was
that's
told
what he said.
That he had caucused this and he had prepared this with Cedric Frolick.
Yes, okay.
So in short, you were made aware, Mr. Agrizzi, of plans to accommodate Minister Masuta in Port Elizabeth.
I was well aware of it, yes, before the time.
And in connection with that plan, the intention of which you knew was that Gavin Watson would have a meeting with Minister Masuta.
Yes.
Do you know, firstly, whether that meeting took place, of your own knowledge, and secondly, what happened at that meeting?
It did happen. The meeting did take place. If I remember correctly, Gavin went there with Valence, his brother. Gavin's not that well known in political circles, more so Ronnie and Valence and Cheeky. And I think that's why it took Valence. As I said previously, Gavin would never allow meetings if only one person went. He always took someone with him, or we had to take someone with us. So it was Valence and Gavin that went to the meeting.
Do you have any knowledge of the contents of that meeting?
No. It was very, very quiet. It was very similar to the meeting I'd had with Vincent Smith. I don't think it was a success at all.
So you were not at the meeting, but your understanding is that that meeting did not turn out to be a success.
No, it was not a success. Normally, if a meeting was successful, Gavin would phone me and he would say to me, you know, a brilliant meeting. He said he's going to help us. No, this meeting, he didn't really comment much on it. He told me the meeting was good, but he didn't say to the extent, you know, that he would normally if a meeting went well. You must remember, I've worked with him for 18 years.
Yes.
I know exactly.
You know how he is like if he has had a good meeting.
If he had a good meeting, I don't think the press would have needed to report on it, Chair.
In paragraph 8, you return to the relationship between Cedric Frolick and African Global Operations as it was then.
Correct.
Please tell the Chair of the events of 2016 and 2017 in that regard.
Chair, in late 2016, a tender was submitted for the catering contracts for correctional services. The then commissioner was a gentleman by the name of Zach Medise, and he was being attended to by Papale Shabane. That was the contact, and Cecilia Pella. During that period, I was concerned about the catering tender for correctional services. As a matter of fact, I was so concerned, and I don't know why I forgot to put it in here, but there was another consultant that we used. I think I mentioned in my first affidavit, where we used another consultant, Regine Kabinda and Sam Sekote. I think, if I recall, we do mention it in the first affidavit. But I was really concerned about this. And when we had submitted the tender hadn't been caucused or anything like it. It was straight tender. But interestingly enough, I got information that we were the cheapest, and at that stage, when I say we, I'm putting myself in that period of time. At that stage, we as Bosasa were the cheapest, and we should have got everything, the 10 management areas. But it appeared that they had issued out 2 other management areas to other companies. So on advice from Gavin Watson, we took the litigation route, okay? And the reason why we did that was purely because Gavin Watson advised me, look, I want you to take the Department of Corrections to court, and you make sure that Brian Bebuk's on top of it. And at that stage, he employed an advocate as well. I recall it vividly. And we drew up an argument, and the papers were ready. I remember this because I was sick at home. I was actually on a drip and on oxygen, sitting at the dining room table, attending to checking papers for Brian Bebuk. And so the arguments, the papers, everything had been prepared. Then the day before the application was to be heard, Gavin Watson arrived there with some of the directors. And they sat around the table and says, we've taken a resolution. The attorneys were there, Brian Bebuk was there, with the advocate Etienne Turon. He says, we've taken a decision. I said, what decision have you taken? He says, no, we're not going to go ahead with this court application. I said, but I asked you this in December, November, in the beginning. I asked you, why do this? You don't pull out the gun and then don't use it. If you start something, you follow it through. He says, no, we've got political advice that this would be suicide if we went ahead with the application. And I argued with him. I said to him, you know, Gavin, you must remember something. We are 100% in the right here. We have a legal footing here. It's not going back. We're not saying that we caucused. We never caucused this. We never dealt with anybody on this. We haven't paid off anybody for this new contract. Why now do you want to turn back? And it got a bit heated. It got so heated at one point that he said to me, I've been told politically I can't do it. I said, I don't believe you. And it was the first time that I started, because I wanted to test him. First time I'd really started and got upset with him. And maybe it was the medication I was on or whatever. Remember, I'd just come out of a coma a week before that. And I don't know if it was my medication or whatever it was, but I lost my temper. I actually, at one stage, he says, yeah, phone, hear from the horse's mouth. And he put me on the phone. And Cedric Frolick confirmed with me over the phone that litigation must be withdrawn. Well, at that stage, I was really annoyed with everybody. My wife came and she chased them out of the house, said, listen, you've been with him for an hour now, he's now got to rest. Because I was actually supposed to be in bed. Get out of the house. And I remember that Etienne Turon and Brian Bebuk were there, and they shook their heads. They said, we cannot believe what is happening here. And I actually called them a bunch of idiots when they left. I was wrong there, but I did. And they left. But
what was your understanding of what they were saying they could not believe? Was it
the turnaround of the decision to retract the application? But interestingly, Chair, what had happened was, because I'd fallen ill I booked myself into hospital on the 25th of December, I think it was. I didn't have chance to make the delivery. There was one specific delivery I had to make that was out of the norm for Richmond MT. And I didn't get to make it because he wasn't around, he was somewhere else, and then I got sick. So now we're talking, I think it was about the 9th of January, that the delivery had to be made. And when Gavin walked into the house, the first thing he says, "Oh, where's MT stuff and the cash?" And I said to my wife, "Go up to the safe in the bedroom. I have a small safe, and there was a bag in there." I said, "Get it for him. Let him take his money. Let him take it. I don't want anything to do with this anymore anyway." So
was that already in a security bag? Or
yeah,
not?
it was packed. I just didn't deliver it.
Yes.
I was told to deliver it, but we missed each other and I couldn't deliver it. And in that bag, I can tell you now, was 175,000 Rand. And I remember it vividly because there was one of these posted stickers in yellow written on the bag, "Don't touch," 175,000 Rand, Gavin to collect.
We can go back to paragraph 79 and the circumstances surrounding the intended withdrawal of the application of which you've spoken. You say in that paragraph,
during 2016-2017, African Global was involved in litigation with the Department of Correctional Services.
Just let me ask the question. I'm
sorry.
sorry. You say in that paragraph that Frolick and Vincent Smith were consulted.
Yes.
Please tell the chair about that.
Originally, before we put in the application, before I did anything, legally, I would consult with Gavin and I would double check, because Gavin had a habit of starting something and then turning it back because he didn't want to look bad with the politicians or whatever. So I then asked him, I said, "Have you checked this with Vincent Smith?" He says, "Yes, I've checked and we must go ahead with it." And at that specific meeting...
But I'm sorry, before you proceed, the last time you spoke about Mr. Smith,
yes,
he had not changed his attitude towards Busasa. Now, how come you are now talking about him being consulted?
Okay, let me explain, Chair. There's a long period of time between... He was friendly towards Busasa after the meeting that we held in Rivonia Road at the one hotel there. In my first affidavit, I cover it.
Oh, this was after?
This is after. That's
Okay.
2016, 2017,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, then I understand.
That's the meeting that was
7
held...
or 8 years later.
More or less. No, I wouldn't say that. I can't remember exactly now. I don't have my other affidavit here. But that was the meeting where we had Magashula there and Mrs. Winnie Ngwenya there.
Yes,
and Senior Pella.
Okay.
And they had fish ordered from the restaurant, the
Okay,
ocean.
no. At least now I can see it's
Okay.
after, yeah.
All right.
It's-
So,
yeah.
so that
Yes.
happened then. That meeting happened and then he was pro
Yeah.
us.
Yes.
And he worked with Busasa.
Yes.
So
You asked whether he had been consulted.
yeah, I asked, has he been consulted? He says, "Why don't you check?" You check my phone records. I actually did phone him and check. I says, "Are you aware of this retracting?" He says, "Yes." And he put down the phone.
Yes,
So, I'm sorry, it slipped my mind now.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
But they both said that and agreed that the litigation must be withdrawn.
Yes.
Is it
And did you find out what Plan B was going to be, or if there was going to be Plan B to achieve what the application would have achieved, or was it simply that the application was to be withdrawn or not to be pursued, and that was the end? That was going to be the end of the story.
You know, Chair, at that stage, I remember I'd resigned in the August, and I I was just out of hospital. I didn't know yet
Yes.
that he had put a claim on my life insurance. So I was annoyed, but I wasn't to the point where I would,
Yes.
confront him too much. But
Okay.
I was fed up. I'd made up my mind, and I didn't even bother asking what Plan B was.
Yes,
I actually afterwards I came back. Etienne Turon, the advocate, and Brian Biebeck, the attorney, was still sitting at a big white table I had on my patio. It was the dining room table on the patio, and I said to them, "I've had enough. I've had enough of this." And they said they can't believe what's happening. It's absolutely ridiculous. And they then left, and I apologized to them for losing my temper. As a matter of fact, what then happened was Watson then sent me an apology of upsetting me, and he sent my wife an apology as well, that they'd upset me. I don't think they realized how sick I was.
Okay.
Just to get the sequence of events right in relation to Mr. Smith, the visit to Parliament about which you testified coincided more or less with the release of the SIU report for the first time.
It was more or less that time.
And that must have been about 2009, 2010,
Correct.
I think you said.
Correct.
According to your first statement, in paragraph 24.1, page 44 of your first, page 43 of your first statement, the meeting with Vincent Smith at the hotel in Rivonia Road took place during 2011.
Correct.
And the events of which you're now talking regarding the advice to withdraw the litigation from Frolick and Smith, that would have taken place during 2016, 2017.
It was 2016. I remember that vividly.
Well, in your previous evidence and statement, I don't remember that you had mentioned that Bosasa had sought to use Mr. Frolick in order to win Mr. Smith over, but I may be mistaken. I want to ask you this question. Do you know whether Mr. Smith was won over because of Mr. Frolick's efforts, or was it just independently because of other efforts that were being made by Bosasa, or both?
It could be both, Chair. I don't know specifically about Mr. Frolick, but I do know that it was Winnie Ngwenya and it was Makachula, I think it's Makachula, was the guy that won him over eventually. Because I remember the meeting that we held that I was invited to by Gavin Watson that took place in 2011, was at a hotel, and I remember vividly that it was a second meeting that Gavin had had. He never took me to the first meeting, but this was the second meeting that Pella had coordinated the meeting place. Smith was there, Winnie Ngwenya was there, Magashula was there, Gavin Watson was there. I remember even what was ordered from, it's like yesterday, Cecilia Pella phoned a guy by the name of Nico. I remember he spoke to Nico, and he ordered fish from Fishmonger in Rivonia, somewhere in Rivonia, and I'm allergic. I was at that stage, I was scared of eating fish, so I ordered a rump steak with vegetables. And they had fish, line fish, that was cooked in foil. That's how vividly it is in my mind. I can even take you to the investigators to the room where we had actually had the meeting, and they could maybe check who had booked it and who had paid it.
Yes, thank you.
Before we go down the menu further, you mentioned Makashule.
Yes.
Is it Makakula or
Makakula.
Makakula.
Magakula. I can't remember his.
What's your
It's either
recollection of the
Magashula or
spelling?
Magakula. But it's not Ace Makashula. It's
Yeah.
not him. Makakula.
You used that name
Yes.
when you last gave evidence, not Makashule.
No, it's Makakula.
Thank you.
But
Do you recall the spelling? M-H?
no, I don't,
You
because I
can't,
never
don't
ever
you?
wrote
Okay.
anything to him. He was part of the portfolio committee, so you'll be
Yes.
able to pick it up from that.
Okay. If you are able to see it in the previous statement, if it's there, maybe you can give us the spelling, if it is the same person.
It's transcribed in the evidence as Magagula.
There is a surname called that, and it is pronounced as Makakula. Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Agrizzi, during the time of your illness,
Yes.
what happened to the payments for which you were responsible?
Most of the payments had been made early in December because I just come from my son's wedding. I had family from overseas around, and that, so all the payments that needed to be done were done. There were just some extra payments that needed to be done.
So you deal with those in paragraph 81.
That's what constituted the 175,000 rand.
Then you go on at paragraph 82 to deal with circumstances relevant to Danny Mansell's work in Bosasa.
Correct.
Deal with that, please.
Chair, I met Danny Mansell the very first time when I went to Diambu those years. I met Danny Mansell. He was exceptionally close to Gavin Watson. Well, he was a shareholder as well, and they would go on holidays and that together. But Danny Mansell and Gavin Watson had been involved with some dealings with the SPDC in Port Elizabeth, and that actually cost Danny Mansell his job. And Gavin Watson had done something at the SPDC with Danny, and because of that, they had lost their job. And strangely enough, Dr. Smith told me the whole the story, because Dr. Smith was involved with the SPDC as well. And that's how this whole thing came together, was with the involvement of Ronnie Watson, with the ladies from the Diambu Holdings, that all got together. And that's the history of how Danny was involved with Gavin. Yeah, as I stated in my previous statement, Danny left Bosasa. There was an acrimonious fight. When Gavin gets upset with you, forget it. It was a very acrimonious fight. I remember it was at a place called the Big Five in Krugersdorp in front of all the senior staff. It was very embarrassing, and Danny then decided he was going to exit. He was paid an amount of money, and he had left. But then, and Danny had gone farming with cattle, but my relationship with Danny Mansell wasn't very good, because Danny blamed me for interfering with Gavin, which I never did. I just did what I was told to do. But amongst other things, Danny suddenly reappeared on the scene in late 2003, 2004. And I'd met him once or twice, and at that stage the company had bought two facilities. One was a facility, old mining hostel in Randfontein called Two North, and the other one was a hostel as well called Leipitz Vlei. And Danny was actively involved with doing that with the building and the construction with Rekele. Sorry, am I diverting from the... Sorry, Chair.
You are a little, but carry on.
All right, no. I'm just giving you the history of this situation.
Yes.
So Danny made it his job to try and get on my good side for whatever reason. He tried to make amends, and I don't harbor grudges, so I welcomed him in. He was staying at the Cedar Lodge at that stage, and Gavin had just given his son and himself a contract to remove trees at Two North Hostel, which has now been, it's because of radioactiveness, they closed it down. But they'd given the work as well to do the building of the walls around Two North and around Leipitz Vlei to a company called Rekele Construction in Rianuxma. But I noticed that Gavin was working with Danny and with MT and with Patrick Gillingham. And I'll go into detail on it. But the one thing that Danny Mansell was involved with, and there's no denying about it, it's all in black and white, was he was involved with, directly with the meetings with Gavin Watson and with MT and with Gillingham in the beginning. So they were having meetings. And amongst other things, he was involved in arranging for the payments from Bosasa to his company, which was called Grant 4. And It's a company that's reflected in the SIU report as well. But Grant 4 basically did all the building for the houses. They paid it over and that type of thing. So once all that had been done, I just want to go to my notes here, because after that, after having done all the technical management and managing the technical department as well for Bosasa, so he was building, managing the technical department, he started becoming part of the company. And he would invoice the company on a regular basis, and things would go ahead. Do you want me to carry on?
No, it's not necessary to go any further than you have in your statement, unless you specifically wish to.
All right, sorry, I'm reading. I'm not following the statement, Chair. Sorry, I'm just telling you as it happened.
No, that's fine.
So then there was a company that was formed by Jared Mansell and his wife is Lisa. So they called it L&J Civils. That's how they got the name L&J. So L&J Civils was the entity that they also used to handle things for Patrick Gillingham and Richmond M.T.
The books of Grande 4
Yes.
and L&J Civils,
Yes.
were they ever dealt with?
Chair, the books for L&J were dealt with. I'd often walk into the office and Tony Perry would be sitting with Danny Mansell, and they were busy with checkbooks and stubs, and then they were doing a reconciliation of what needed to be paid for Grant 4. And there were payments then made by Bosasa to Grant 4.
So Grant 4 and L&J Civils were the
Yes.
companies that were used to purchase and construct,
That's
for
correct.
and construct houses to which you've referred elsewhere in your evidence, both on the previous occasion and now.
Correct.
But Bosasa financed this through those two companies.
That's right, because afterwards you'll recall that I said when we had to do a cleanup for Gavin, we couldn't really change the substance on the computer system that said Grant 4. So what we had to do was pull the invoices and change the invoices physically to reflect something totally different, instead of reflecting work done for Patrick Gillingham.
Yes, but once again, it appears that between Bosasa and the work it was doing, or the work it was financing, intermediary companies were used.
Correct. Always arm's length. So I just want to see if there's anything I missed on my statement.
Well, you may just mention the information in paragraph 87.
Yes. Even after leaving, even to today, Danny Mansell created a company. What happened was he was very nervous, so he wanted to get out of the country. And he immigrated and he established a company over there, a company called Safe as Fences, America. And it's got an American flag and I think a South African flag next to it on the logo. I can actually produce the invoices that he would send through. And the agreement was that he would get $7,000 per month for the rest of his life. He would just invoice Bosasa for consulting work done or work done from over there to here. And that's $7,000 US. I would have to approve and I would have to send it off through the normal processes, but there was an agreement reached with him and Gavin. And I questioned that agreement. I was told, just shut up, you know. If you wanted to ask too many questions, the door's right around the corner.
All right,
So,
yes.
sorry.
Is that
Yes.
what you wanted to say? You deal in paragraph 88 with the role played by the then company secretary, Mr. Tony Perry. Tell the chair about that, please.
This is a very critical point in the testimony, Chair, because Tony Perry was brought into Bosasa by Gavin Watson. Tony Perry had worked with Gavin Watson previously. There'd been issues and there was court cases. I remember Tony telling me that there was court cases where he had to attest to certain things on behalf of Gavin, and there was issues there, but I'm sure the investigators will find that all out. But he was responsible for writing up contracts and documenting deals. Now, I remember specifically the transaction that he did with Richmond MT and Gavin Watson. That was the document, if Chair remembers correctly, that we had to look for and search for, and eventually we found it. Now, being who I am, I was inquisitive. I made a copy of it, but I don't have the copy anymore. But on that document was an agreement with a per diem cost that was allocated and agreed upon between Gavin and Richmond MT that would be paid as a commission. And the signatories there was Gavin Watson and Richmond MT and Tony Perry. So it's critical that that information, that the Chair knows that. That document, I can't find it for the life of me, and it's gone missing. But Tony Perry was very closely associated with the Watson family, and they kept him very close. So he did all the administration type of things, rebuilding the company. That was his task, was to create a confused structure and handle the BEE stuff of the company, cross agreements, that type of thing, setting up of new entities, because previously it was just BSASA. So he was there from 2002, 2001, if I recall correctly, and he was involved with this whole process.
You say Tony Perry joined the BSASA group in about 2003?
Yeah, it was about then, 2002, 2003 maybe. My dates, Chair, are what they are.
Yes.
You know, please bear in mind, I'm working off a few notes here and there, a few old books I might have, but most of our stuff is still there.
Yes.
Perhaps you should go to paragraph 90 then. You've dealt with 88 and 89 in general terms, and talk about the incident that happened early 2004.
Okay. In 2004, the boardroom, same boardroom where we met Cedric Frolick, Gavin was sitting in the boardroom. He would sit there and read the newspaper after 10 o'clock. And he was sitting in the boardroom, and he was, I remember it, the door was closed. But at that stage, the boardroom was drywalling. So there was drywalling between the loo and the boardroom, and it was thin drywalling. So whatever anybody said in the boardroom, you would hear. I was in the loo, and I was listening to this conversation, and I was answering I don't want to get too graphic, but I was answering emails on my phone as well. So I was listening and I was answering emails. And I heard Gavin say to Tony Perry, just register it, don't argue with me. Richmond wants it, and it must get done. And that was regarding Leonora Investments, which had to be registered by Tony Perry. So he was instructed by Gavin Watson to register Leonora Investments for Richmond MT, or the Leonora Trust. I can't remember if it was a trust or investment. But I remember that vividly.
Then you deal in paragraph 93 with the document that had gone missing. You will recall your evidence in January of this year,
Yes.
where you spoke of a document actually signed by Gavin Watson. There were instructions to destroy documents. You destroyed documents, but you retained a document signed by Gavin Watson. Is that
Correct.
the same document you're now talking about?
That's the document I mentioned earlier.
That is the document that you told the chair that you did not destroy, but you returned to Gavin Watson.
I made a copy of it, so if I can take you back.
Yes.
I made a copy. When we found the document, I didn't tell anybody, I made a copy of it.
Right.
I was still in my old house, I remember it. I drove up the driveway, quickly made a copy of it, and then went back downstairs, got in the car, and drove to Gavin's house.
And it's that on that occasion that Gavin Watson, according to your evidence and other evidence, the document was destroyed and disposed of by Gavin Watson.
That's the document he tore up, put in a bag, put water with it, made a mash out of it, and flushed it down the toilet.
Right. Is that what you talk about in paragraph 93?
That is correct.
What did that document contain?
That
Remind the
document
chair,
was
please.
an agreement in terms of the catering contract specifically, and it mentioned another contract. I think it was a contract for accommodating youth at Leopards Vlei. But that document there spelled out what the commission basis would be that Richmond Tea would receive. And the person that drew up that document was Tony Perry.
Do you recall when it would have been, more or less? I know it's a long time ago. When, around about what year it would have been drawn up?
Torn up?
Uh-huh. Mid 2000s or the
No, I'll tell you, Chair, it was when I had the American visitors with me, because I was at a lodge called Tuningi Lodge in Madikwe when I got the call to leave everything and to go through to come to the office. I still had to arrange. So once the travel agent who refuses to talk to me starts talking to me, or the investigators, we'll pick up all those things and get exact dates for you as well.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anything else before we deal with the events under the heading Build All, Arthur Kotson and Fred Aliboni?
There's one issue that I think I need to raise, and that's in terms of Better Fence and Pezulu. So whilst I was at home, I was playing with my nephews one Sunday, I got a call from Gavin Watson to ask, and I mentioned it in my previous affidavit, to discuss the fencing contract, or what would I do to a piece of fence to make it unique and patent, that they could patent. And that's when Tony Perry was actually in the meeting. So the meeting consisted of Danny Mansell, Tony Perry, Gavin Watson, Michael Rodenberg, and it was, I think, a gentleman by the name of Peter Ramut in that meeting from Belgium. And in that meeting is when they phoned me, and I remember even speaking to Tony then, because he was in Cape Town at the meeting where they discussed Bosasa acquiring a 26% BEE share in Better Fence in exchange for the contract for correctional services. My recollection was about 2004.
Okay.
If you would deal with the subject matter in paragraph 96 and following, please.
Yes.
Involving Arthur Kotson and Fred Aliboni.
So in 2005 and 2006, Besos was extremely cash flush. I think we had over 300 million rand in the bank. So it was a very good business. And Gavin Watson decided to go into a prawn aquaculture project with a chap by the name of, what's his first name? Was it Kevin? No,
Kevin Wills, you deal with in paragraph 96.
I can't remember if it's Kevin Wills, or if it's Kevin K. Wills or something else Wills. I can't remember the first name. The first name eludes me at the moment. Sorry, Kevin Wills. I raised my concerns that this was essentially not our core business at that time. Our core business was providing facilities management, security infrastructure, resources, youth development, and that type of thing. So this was totally out of our business dealings. And I was very negative towards it, but he went ahead and he didn't want to budge on it. And at that stage, he felt that it was a good business opportunity. So he got involved with Kucha, and he was given a piece of land in Kucha. How he got it, I don't know, but I don't know what EIAs were done in that. I wasn't involved much at all. Where I was involved was dealing with Fred Alibone and Arthur Kotson. So I had to employ Arthur Kotson's son as well, Jason. He was employed in our IT department, so that's how I knew Arthur, and I got on with Arthur. So Arthur Kotson at that stage had a small building company, you know, these building, Bucky brigades, we call them. So Gavin decided, no, he wanted to use Arthur Kotson to build SEOC. And I still commented, I said, you know, I don't know if it's such a good idea because this guy's got 2 buckies and a cement mixer. I don't think if you're doing that kind of construction for 300 million rand, you use somebody decent. But there were numerous insurmountable issues with the EIAs at SEOC at the stage. So he deployed a whole lot of people from Bosasa down to Siak at Kucha to help build with that. That included the architects and all that type of thing. And he then bought the company for 15 million rand.
He bought Buildall.
Buildall. So he bought Buildall for 15 million rand. So the transaction was concluded and the payment was made. And why I mentioned that he bought it was because it was very important that he controlled Arthur Kotson and Fred Allibone as well. So one day I was actually driving in the car with Gavin. So every time we drove around, I would drive the car. And at that stage, he had a Porsche Cayenne, and I enjoyed driving the car because I could go fast with it and all that type of thing. And on the car, he was on speakerphone with Arthur Kotson. And I knew it was Arthur Kotson because it shows on the dial who you're on the line with. And he was just saying to him, listen here, just go ahead and revamp the guy's house. Just do it. And, you know, Arthur was saying, yeah, but how do we cover it? And he said, just pay it, just sort it out. When I started asking questions on whose house they were revamping, Gavin just said to me, he said, listen, stop your fishing, all right, and just focus on your driving. It's an old friend that he's looking after. All right.
Did you learn who this person was?
Yes, it was a gentleman by the name of Twabo Ndube.
Is that the person mentioned in paragraph 100?
That's correct. And it was something to do with the EIAs and SEARC and his involvement and his association with the people down in Port Elizabeth.
Did you find out what position was held by Mr. Ndube?
I did a search. I was curious, and I did a search, and I think it was the MEC, was the MEC of sorts, based in Port Elizabeth.
That name Twabo, is that how it was? Not Tabo?
That's how it was spelt on the, I remember the spelling.
On the business card or something?
No, on the
screen
of the cell phone thing of the car.
Okay.
That's how it was spelt. Sorry, it's not how it was spelt. It's spelt like that. I think I've got it on my cell phone. That's how he spelt it because he sent me the message number as well.
Okay.
Then you mention SEARC and its potential uses for Bosasa in paragraph 102.
Yeah, I was told SEARC, when it was operational, that this was an ideal model to be used to get international funding. So at one stage, we had the Chinese bank or somebody looking at it from China. We had so many visitors to SEARC, it was unbelievable. I wasn't there, I'd lost interest in this. I did not want to get involved in it. But I was always told it's a game changer. Every meeting we had, this was a game changer, and I'm not involved with it because I'm apostropolous. So it was a big bone of contention. And
did you notice that payments were being made through or from SEARC?
Chair, there was an incident that kept occurring, and it was R1 million a month that was going out of the country to a company called SRI, if I remember correctly. It's not, sorry, it just come to me now. It's not Kevin Wills, it's David K. Wills. David Kevin Wills. Sorry, that's my mistake. I just need to correct that on the thing. It's David Kevin Wills. That's a typing error. Sorry, Chair, I just want to correct that.
Let's go back to the payments made offshore.
So these
deal with that paragraph 102.
So there was a bulk payment that was made to the value of about 35 million rand, but then there was payments every single month of 700,000 to R1 million. I can't recall the exact amount. It was not the exact 700 or R1 million. It was in between that. It was 752 or something like that. That's why I've used 700. And these payments would continuously go out. And it was draining all the profits of the company. Between the construction and these payments, I mean, it was ridiculous. So I started making queries. I started querying these things because I thought you know, I've got a responsibility towards the people in the company and the company as well. We can't just be maverick with our money. And I was told, no, Gavin owns 51% of SRI, something. Resource.
What did you believe about SRI?
There is one thing you can bet on. This isn't the last you've seen of Ryan Doyle. One of the most fierce sporting Olympic rivalries in recent times has been between two of the greatest sprint cyclists of the modern era. Victoria Pendleton and Anna Mears. The gloves came off and the mental game of words went into full swing as they aired their dirty laundry on the eve of London 2012.
The rivalry is a rivalry. It's a great one between Victoria and I.
Anna and I are very different riders.
Because she will be retiring after the London Olympic Games.
She's someone who likes to kind of push the rules, and I definitely don't.
We meet when we're in good form.
Yeah, I was really annoyed when she cut me up in the Keirin in 2006 because they don't restart Keirins and your chance is gone.
And when we race each other, we literally turn each other inside out.
She apologised for doing it afterwards, saying, you know, I'm sorry I hooked you, you know, I didn't mean it to be dangerous, and I was like, well, okay then, I wouldn't do it. You might do it, but I wouldn't do it.
Sometimes with great rivalries, you can't have a great friendship because there is so much riding on the line for those involved.
Spoke yesterday of a certain party recently going to Kucha to excavate the Sea Ark site to apparently look for something, presumably these computers.
Correct.
And
1 second, Mr. Pretorius. Can you ask somebody to send a message to, maybe ask Mr. Pella to send a message to Mr. November that if he is able to, I would like to see him when I take a break for here. Thank you. You may proceed.
it may be important because it may relate to the quality and nature of the investigations currently being conducted, and you will talk about your own arrests in due course. Are you prepared to tell the Chair what you know of who conducted this failed excavation?
Chair, I received a call, and I think it was a message, and I'd have to check if it was a message or a call, but from a lady who was in Port Elizabeth. I think the name was Angelo Agrizzi, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So I'll know to search on my computer, on my cell phone later. But I received a call to say, do you know about the Hawks digging up and excavating the whole beachfront? And I said to her, look, I can't talk at this stage. I don't want to discuss anything with anybody at this stage, but I thought it was apt to mention to the investigators that it's pointless to go and try and dig up, because apparently they excavate and they saw there was some different type of soil where they excavated, and it looked like it had been re-excavated. It had been excavated before they re-excavated it. So that's basically what was happening. And the concern I had is that why not come and talk? Why not just pick up the phone me? I could give you all the information like I've done with the Commission. If you want me to, I'll even fly down there, because even with I just want to add it in, even with Fred Allibone, Andries van Tonder, I asked him and we agreed that he flies down and goes and sees Fred Allibone to see if Fred Allibone will give us the document, the book that they had, and information with regards to the politicians' houses. So we're trying to help like that. And, well, he went down, and then I received a message 2 days ago from Fred Allibone to say, no, the matter's sorted. He's given all the stuff to his attorneys. So that's what we got. But we're trying to help wherever we can. So
when would this failed excavation have taken place?
It was about 2-3 weeks ago.
Sorry again, but was your understanding that the book is still in existence?
We went to find out, but he was very elusive when Andries van Tonder spoke to him.
Okay.
It looked like he had been told not to meet with Andries.
Okay. Thank you.
There are two separate issues that we should clarify.
Yes.
Buried at some stage in the sea sand.
Yes.
At Sea Ark were computers.
That's right, Grant 4 and L&J Sybil's.
Yes, those documents.
Correct.
Those were then subsequently taken away and put in a garage, as you said.
That is correct.
Notwithstanding that fact, of which you knew and could have given assistance, the Hawks went to excavate again on that same site.
Well, we were told it was the Hawks by this person from the Herald.
Yes. That may be a subject for further investigation.
Correct.
But the black book kept by Allibone, that's a different document.
Yes.
And that is the document that you say may be with attorneys.
Correct.
Then if we can move on then to paragraph 108, and there you deal with Guarano Fleet and Favors World dealings with Basasa. Please tell the Chair about that, and you can follow the summary on pages 41 and 42.
Okay.
That would be sufficient.
All right. So, Chair, my dealings with the fleet management was really, I was involved as the operations guy, but I wasn't too involved in the actual business. But what happened was there was a joint venture between a chap by the name of Brian Gwebu, Itumaraba, and West Bank at that stage, that had the contract with a company called Corona Financial Services, which then provided fleet management for the SMS fleets to government, and on RT62, I think it was, called the contract, and that basically managed 15,000 vehicles for government.
All right, SMS is Senior Management Service.
Correct.
So these would be vehicles driven by senior government officials.
That's correct.
And you say that there was a joint venture between a Mr. Maraba and a Mr. Gwebu in a vehicle called Guarano?
Yes,
Not a vehicle,
with
an
West Bank
entity
at the
called
stage.
Guarano.
Correct.
Right. That eventually came into the hands of Bosasa.
Correct.
Just explain that, please.
That eventually Gavin Watson decided that he wanted to buy it, and he bought the shares of Mr. Maraba and Mr. Gwebu. I think he paid 20 million rand for the shares. It was a very good contract. And at one stage, it was the reason why we had gone on an acquisition trail to buy up other companies that were supposedly servicing that contract. So we bought those companies, and eventually we got rid of them again because they weren't actually servicing that contract, and it was all a big farce. But I wasn't part of RT62 at all for the provision of the fleet management, the tender itself. At that stage, Gavin had employed two accountants. One was the name of Vickers Late, and the other one was Alan Chapman, and they were appointed to run the RT62 contract, as well as some other people as well. Okay.
Just to go back,
Yes.
because we've digressed a little, there was a tender
That's right.
issued by government
Correct.
for the provision of fleet vehicles and management of fleet vehicles under the rubric of the National Department of Transport.
That is correct.
And this was vehicles for senior government officials.
Correct.
Or members of the SMS, Senior Management Service.
People who were entitled to get the subsidized vehicles.
Okay, then if you'd go to paragraph 112, please.
I was told that the contract was awarded, the contract to Bosasa, should be Corona, had been prearranged and actually was unlawful. I was openly told that. This was told to me by Papa Leshane. At that stage, Papa wasn't involved with Corona, but he had a major issue with Corona. At that stage, he told me as well that they were paying a chap by the name of Umlungise. I don't know if that's spelt right.
Just for the record, Guarano is spelled Kgwerano.
That is correct. So there's no confusion. There was Corona Financial Services and Corona Fleet Management.
And
There's
we're
two
talking
different
here of,
companies. Corona Financial Services. Okay.
then tell the chair, please, about the joint venture that was then created.
So can I just explain the involvement of Brian Gwebu and Itumaraba? Sorry.
Yes, please do.
So Brian Gwebu and Itumaraba, Alan Chapman, Vickers Late, they were responsible for Corona. I took no responsibility or accountability for Corona whatsoever. Only later on did we, when we had to get rid of the other people and start running it properly ourselves. Otherwise, we would have made major losses in the company. So at a later stage, there was another new joint venture, and that was called Pavis World, which was basically for dignitaries like yourself. When you go to Cape Town and you need to hire a vehicle, it had to go through Pavis World. And
That's
they got
P-H-A-V-I-S.
Correct.
W-O-R-L-D.
Correct, yes. So there was a joint venture with Avis Fleet and Corona, not Bosasa. Well, you know, Corona, Bosasa was the same company. It really, they were interlinked. So this entity, Pavis World, was also awarded the fleet services tender to provide the rental vehicles to Avis dealership to deal with Ministerial and people such as yourself that needed a hired vehicle whenever you flew around. I wasn't involved with the process right in the beginning, But I started realizing that this joint venture wasn't working out, and it was actually costing us as a company at that stage. And when I refer to us, I'm putting myself back in that time period. It was costing the company money. They weren't collecting on time, all that. So my suggestion was that as a company, we exit out of this transaction because it was a waste of time. So Gavin instructed me then to go and see Avis and Mr. Clive Else, who I'd met then for the first time, and request that Bosasa be released from this joint venture. Alan Chapman had just left the employ of the joint venture and of Bosasa and of Corona, and Brian Gwebu and Itu Morabe had left as well. So they weren't there anymore. So I was told once again to go with Papa Leshabane and enter into discussions with Clive Else at Avis. And a few meetings ensued. We held them at the Avis offices. It's near Kempton Park. And at a later stage, a payment was made by Avis in excess of 23.5 million rand. And the agreement was that this was supposedly the share, a Bosasa share in the joint venture, but the value of the shares wasn't that, because Avis had used another entity to make the profits in. So there was no profits in that company anywhere, it's just liabilities.
Sorry, just pause there. Let's
Yes.
summarize, if we may,
Yes.
before we go on. There was a joint venture between Avis and Quirano,
Well, Pavis was the joint venture, yes,
and the joint venture was called Favis World,
that's right.
right? Quirano was linked to Bosasa.
Correct.
In essence, they were one and the same.
My point exactly.
The purpose of this joint venture was to provide rental vehicles to ministerial and senior government officials.
Correct.
It was unsuccessful.
You're 100% right.
You were then ordered to dissolve this joint venture. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Or to allow Avis to buy Bosasa out.
Correct.
Right. And then you deal with the terms of the buyout and how that occurred in paragraph 117.
Well, Avis agreed to it. Clive Else agreed to it. There was a lady by the name of Jackie that was there as well in the meeting. Senior Pella was in the meeting. Papa Leshabane was in the meeting. And the agreement was very clear. Yes, we'll pay you 23.5 million rand, but we want you guys to make sure that this contract gets extended.
Who said that?
Clive Else.
Right. So Avis said, yes, we will buy you Bosasa out of this
Yes.
joint venture,
But
we, Avis, want you to ensure
That-
that the contract is extended.
Correct.
The government contract is extended.
correct.
Right. What was the value of, in your estimation or to your knowledge, of the Bosasa share in this joint venture?
It's very difficult to give a value on it, but the value, I would say, at maximum, goodwill and everything, was about maybe 18, 19 million rand, if that.
Right, let's approach it another way. What was the amount paid by Avis for the Bosasa share in the joint venture?
About 23.5 million rand. I remember the amount because they would only release the check once they'd got the extension letter from the Department of Transport.
And what was that amount of 23.5 million rand intended to cover?
That would cover Bosasa shareholding or whatever arrangements there was. As I said, I wasn't integrally involved in the setup, but I was involved in the dissolving of it. What it covered was Bosasa's contributions as a shareholder, and there was an amount that was kept separate that would be used by Pella and Leshabane to make sure that they get the extension. So to answer your question, there was an amount set aside for gratification.
In order to ensure the extension of the contract?
Correct.
And was the contract extended?
Yes, it was.
Why, to Avis' knowledge, as far as you know, was it important for them to ask Busasa to see to the extension of the contract when Busasa was pulling out? And why wouldn't they think that they could get the extension themselves?
Because, Chair, the influence that Busasa had with government was very high.
Was that known to Avis at the time as well?
Most definitely.
Okay.
Paragraph 118 and following, you deal with certain further information regarding Ms. Dudumieni. Could you tell the Chair about that, please?
I thought that it might be apt to add in some extra clarity points. And 118 is that I first met Dudumieni at the Sheraton Hotel. I was well aware of the fact at all times that Gavin Watson had committed to paying the 300,000 rand in cash to Mieni for onward payment to, and I put inverted commas, the Jacob Zuma Foundation. I mentioned earlier that I can't understand why a foundation would receive cash. That's very risky, but it had to be cash. I'm not aware of any time that it was paid in a check. But on occasions, I would even have to pack the money and prepare it. At this time, Mieni was the chair of the Jacob Zuma Foundation. And then, Chair, I want to bring to the point that subsequent to my testimony, Dudumieni made a statement on ENCA.
This is your testimony in January.
Correct.
Yes.
Regarding meetings held at the Bosasa office, and stated that she's only ever attended one official visit, which was the visit of President Zuma at the stage to SEARC, and we spent 4 hours on the Bosasa campus with Gavin Watson and the rest of the directorate. This is not true. There were meetings held on a few occasions at the Bosasa offices. One such meeting was regarding a fracking transaction.
You've testified about that
Correct.
in January.
Correct. So there are 2 meetings. Then a further meeting took place after a meeting held in the conference venue. So the third meeting took place not at the offices, but I was called to a meeting held at the Intercontinental, I think it's the Sheraton Hotel at Oliver Tambo Airport. A meeting took place there in a conference venue, in a room where they have a conference layout. There was snacks and everything provided to us. When we met, she had arranged the meeting where we were going to meet with the then CEO, Nico Besaidenout of SAA. At the meeting, what was discussed pre the meeting was a tender that had gone in for security services, and she also wanted to look at the opportunity of taking over that security contract, as well as the catering contracts for South African Airways. Just to give you a bit of background.
So all in all, that's about how many meetings at different venues?
So it was 4 meetings.
4 meetings?
Yes.
Which you attended?
Correct.
Yes, okay.
And then you recall.
So if I can give the Chair a little bit of information with regards to the catering contract and the security contract, I realized this was going south. It wasn't going in a good way. And I painted a picture to Gavin Watson that I don't even want to look at it. Because I said to him, there's no money in it.
Yes.
All right, I said it's just, there's no money in it, let's rather leave it. And funny enough, he agreed.
But what was your real reason? I understand that wasn't your real reason.
Chair, it wasn't the real reason. The real reason was I wanted to stay as far away as I could from SAA and Dudumieni and the foundation and all that. It was, we'd get ourselves, personally, I didn't want to get involved in it. I just didn't want to touch it.
Okay.
I didn't say that to Gavin. I just said to him, look, it's not a feasible contract.
Yes.
Deal with the incident in paragraph 121, please.
All right. In August 2016, my wife and myself were en route from OR Tambo on a SAA flight down to King Shaka Airport. I think it's King Shaka in KZN. We were going on a bit of a break. I resigned, and my phone had been off, and I was just taking a break. There were 2 old people that I look after in the KZN. I said to my wife, let's go down and see them. And take a break for 3-4 days, so I'm away from everybody, let the fresh air of the sea clear my mind. So I was seated, and I remember as you walk into the aircraft, on the left-hand side you get row 1 and you get row 2. And we were seated in row 2 on seats, I think it's D, E, and F. All right, so there was a space between myself and my wife. And the next minute, Dudumieni walked in, and she sat in row 1, right next to the window. I was also seated next to the window. And she turned around
immediately behind her.
She saw me when she walked in. She recognized me.
Yes, but in terms of sitting, I'm
Yes.
saying you were seated behind her.
Directly behind her.
Yes, okay.
Okay. And she turned around and greeted me. My wife introduced us as my wife, but I was very aloof. You know, already now I thought, now this is a conspiracy plan. I'm in the plane. I've just resigned. How come this is happening? So I didn't want to say anything or do anything, you know, because I don't want to talk negative and things like that. But I was aloof with her. And then she asked me, straight out, she asked me, what's wrong with you? I said, no, look, I don't want to talk. She didn't know I'd resigned. And then I said to her, I resigned. She asked me how Gavin Watson is. So I don't know, I've resigned. So perhaps that is what she's referring to. So that was the 5th meeting.
Yes.
I'm told that the evidence in the first statement of Mr. Agrizzi regarding Ms. Mieni, paragraph 41 and 42 of that statement. Can we then go on to paragraph 122, where you deal with matters relating to Gavin Watson?
To the best of my recollection, these are some of the occasions when I was personally present, when there were bribes witnessed taking place, gratification taking place with various members of the ruling party and various departments within the government. He always made it clear to me that the connections that were made were to ensure a constant flow of tenders and business that would benefit Bosasa, and the contracts would come. And Gavin was Bosasa. He was, I mean, the pinnacle. He was the man. He was Bosasa. Every single newsletter you opened up, it was Gavin. Every single email that you received from Truth Online or What's Online, it was the brand, was Gavin. Not anybody else, but all Gavin. So he had, over the years, built up these connections with the various ANC politicians and the main decision makers relating to the awarding of these tenders to Bosasa. He had the contacts, he had the people, he was the godfather, as they called him. Even his nephews called him the godfather. He was the godfather of Bosasa. Everything went through him. He made decisions on everything. What amounts were paid out, he controlled. The cash, Gavin himself decided on the decisions on who would get what. Even in salaries and wages, he would decide who would get what. He would like somebody who was working in a kitchen and say, no, that guy must get an increase, he must get 1,000 Rand extra, and you just did it. So he made those decisions. He made the decisions on firing people. Many times I had to fire people that I didn't feel comfortable, but he'd made the decision. Sometimes I would just transfer the person from head office somewhere else, because I didn't have grounds to fire the person. I also wish to state further some of the occasions when I was personally present when the corruption took place within various members of the, it's a duplication, sorry. There's a duplication there. I'll just carry on, I'll just talk. During my employment throughout all the years, Gavin was in control and he acted in concert with the fellow directors. So the directors we had were people. They basically, everything Gavin said went. They always said yes. If there was one person that used to argue and debate, and everybody will tell you that if you ask them and they come and give testimony, ask them who would debate, it would be me. I would often engage in debates. When it came to dealing with people, when it came to how you handle people, I would debate to a point. But I knew that I was cutting it very fine. And I had to always maintain that respect level, otherwise I'd fall short. But I could debate to a point.
You make comments of a general nature in paragraph 123. Much of it is a summary of what you have said before in evidence, both in January and yesterday and today. Deal in more detail with specific incidents at paragraph 124 and following. Are you happy to go there, or do you wish to say more before we get to paragraph 124?
I just want to mention one thing, and one of the things is prepayments of contracts. So that's one thing that government has to guard against, because if we take some of the contracts that we did, by having these gratifications, we get paid up front hundreds of thousands, hundreds of millions of rand. One of them was Pezulu Fence, where I think without delivering anything, we'd been paid 500 million rand. And it's still happening in government today. So it's a concern I just want to raise, that one needs to be very careful about that.
Would the contracts have provided for that kind of prepayment normally?
Chair, there's no reason why a contract should provide for prepayment.
Yeah.
And if it was provided for, it was always because somebody said, listen, by the way, we'll organize a prepayment, this is what you need to do.
But normally, to your understanding, it would not be provided for in any contract. It would be arrangements that were made outside of the contract.
Normally, unless special arrangements were made with a person.
Yeah.
And whenever there's prepayments, you know there's something fishy.
And you say you know that to the extent that Bosasa may still be having contracts with government departments, you say those prepayments have not stopped.
I can talk about two occasions. One is Pezulu, one is Sondolo, three. One is one of the youth centers where they did prepayments.
Yes. Before any delivery was
correct.
Effected. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Would you deal with the incidents in paragraph 124 and following, please, Mr. Agrizzi?
Chair, the first time I was privy to seeing cash being paid directly to Mti was when I attended the first visit to Mti's house, and it's in a complex called Savannah Hills, number 101, I remember that, because you'd have to tell security where you were going. Where Gavin paid him openly in front of me. It wasn't a secret. He did it in front of me. And I remember vividly, if you walk through the house, we always walked through the garage. There was a study on the right-hand side. We went into the study. The study had a sliding door with a curtain. You move the curtain, the safe was there. And he would open up the safe with a key. It was a key safe, not electronic. And he would pack the money in there.
What was the amount on that occasion?
65,000 rand.
Sorry?
65,000 rand.
Right. And in paragraph 125, you testify further as to factual evidence?
Yes, there was a second occasion that I saw it, which was when we met him at a restaurant called, now I'm not too sure because I don't normally go to this restaurant. It was either Codfather or Godfather. But it's in Rivonia, it's just off Rivonia Road, you turn on your left. I was told to take, to meet Gavin there. And, we were there and we walked in and Mti was there. And Gavin says, no, I usually come here and this is where I meet with Mti. And we had lunch. They had, if I recall, they had had lunch already. They were eating, and I just had a snack when I got there. And I remember that day vividly because when we were at the restaurant, they were still doing renovations, or they were busy working on renovations there. At the same time, and it's not in my statement, but I was told to make a phone call. So the investigators would be able to check my old records. I was told to make a phone call to a certain gentleman who I recall, and it was because he had made statements about Bosasa that had been reported to Gavin Watson, and it upset Gavin, and he told me immediately when I got there, phone this person and tell him to stop his nonsense. So another person, and I'll give the records to the investigators to corroborate the information I'm giving you.
Yes.
But basically it was, I can't remember the exact day, but on that, it was a Friday afternoon. He didn't have a uniform on, and his car, which was a greyish metallic car, a Touareg, was parked on the outside of the restaurant on the road, and Watson's car was parked on the other side. And while they were saying goodbye and that, he opened his boot remotely. And the boot...
being...
Tea.
Yes, yeah.
Opened his boot remotely, and Gavin then took his briefcase out of his car's boot, and he walked to the car, and I remember he lifted up a brown satchel that had like a crocodile print on it. It was normal, like a briefcase satchel, brown one with a crocodile type print on it, and Gavin took the money out of his bag and put it into his bag, and then closed his Touareg's boot.
So this time it wasn't a security bag that was used?
No, it was a security bag as well.
It was a security bag?
Yeah, it was a full security bag.
Yes, okay.
It was bigger than normal.
Yes. Do you estimate that the amount there was?
I estimated it because it was close proximity.
Yes.
I estimated it about 150.
150,000
rand, yes.
Yeah, okay.
But it was eye-opening to me because it was done in broad daylight.
Yes, thank you.
And then in paragraph 127, you talk about activities in Gavin Watson's vault.
There was occasions where Gavin would call me to his vault when he was packing the cash, very similar to what you saw on the video, but he would specifically count out the amounts for tea and others and say to me to keep it with me till the morning. So he would give it to me. I would have to then lock it in my boot of my car, and the next morning I knew I would have to meet him at 7:30 or 7 o'clock at the gates of Savannah Hills, which was the complex where MT was. And I would always, I would always be there early, and he would arrive, and then I would drive through the gate with him. So when we arrived at his house, I mean, this is how flippant it was. The garage door would be open, and you would walk through the garage door. There was always golf equipment and shoes and everything on the side. Walk through the door, and you'd go to the study, and we'd just wait there. And then he would come down. There was a lady, domestic, that he had there all the years called I even know her name, Vuyelwa was the domestic's name, and she would bring us a tray with some coffee cups and coffee and hot water. So that's how it happened. And then every time I'd have to take the bag out of the boot of the car and then go through, and he would put the bag on his desk, he would unpack it, and it would be packed in the safe.
Before you go on to paragraph 130, the Chair will recall that video played of Gavin Watson and others in his vault where cash appeared to have been packed out.
Yes.
Was that, to your knowledge, a regular occurrence or a once-off occurrence?
No, these were monthly occurrences. I just want to add something. I recall now, this must have been about 2010, because it was the 2010 World Games. And I still remember he had a lot of memorabilia there. And I said to him, come on, give me some of your memorabilia. So he gave me a set of coins that were minted. I don't think the value is much, but just so that I've declared it now. So I remember it was about 2010.
Who gave you these coins?
MT.
Do you still have them?
No, I gave them away. I thought they were gold, they weren't.
Paragraph 130, would you just deal briefly with...
So MT was an avid golfer. He'd always spend
events?
time on the golf course. I did, I thought they were gold. Sorry, I detracted there.
Okay.
So MT was an avid golfer, and he'd love his golf. He was always on the golf course. He always was with people, and he played golf with some of the people in corrections, and things start coming back now to me. But I remember walking in one morning, and Gavin says to me, he says, all this I've paid for, all the golf clubs. And he said, look, here's even a special one that was made specifically for him. Now, I'm not a golfer, but I believe he had to go to the pro shop, and they have a bespoke section where they make golf clubs as well, and you practice on it. He explained the whole thing to me, and they made it according to him as well. so that I recall that all the golf clubs had been bought. And as I said to the investigators, an easy analysis is to take an analysis of all the credit cards of Gavin Watson. He's not a golfer. And you'll see the golf clubs have been paid by Bosasa. All the credit cards that he owns are credit cards paid for by Bosasa. So Bosasa would have reflected as making the payments for the golf clubs. But there were various other incidents, Chair. There was one incident where there's a clothing shop in Sandton. I'm not going to mention their names. Well, it's up to the advocate if I must.
It's in your
mention.
statement. Your statement is public
Okay.
knowledge.
So I was taken to a shop and I was told there's accounts here, just get them paid, please. And it's a little shop called Gray's in Sandton City. And I remember it vividly because you go up the escalator coming from the square side. I don't shop there personally. And you go up the escalator and it's on the left-hand or the right-hand side, one of the two. That's a bit confusing. But I remember going into the shop and having to get the slips and then having to get them paid. And there's a short Xhosa-speaking man there that he only dealt with the Watsons and with Mti. And I remember one day as well, just going in there and I thought, let me have a look to buy a pair of, I actually was going in there, to buy a shirt for Gavin Watson for his birthday present from the company. And I walked in there and the short gentleman said to me, oh, by the way, when is Mti coming back? Because there's a sports jacket which I altered for him, a Boss sports jacket. So if the investigators go there, they will pick up all these records. And Gavin Watson's size and Mti's my size. And so you'd be able to differentiate on the sizes bought. There was another incident where I was down in December. I used to go and visit the old people down there, and I got a call from T, which was strange that I got the call in December. And I thought, oh, Gavin must have his phone off. So he asked me where I was. So I said, no, I'm in Umhlanga. And at that stage, I was at the shopping center at Umhlanga. I was having, I think, a lunch or something with my family. And he says, oh, meet me. I've just found a nice shop here in Umhlanga. And it was up the road. So I said, all right, well, I wasn't about to debate it or not. And it was specifically a Mareshki shop. It's a shoe shop that imports Italian shoes. And I know the shop because I once or twice have been in the shop and I've spoken to the lady there, and it's got a nice heritage because they make shoes for the Pope. So that's why I went in there, and I bought one or two pairs for myself. But they're very expensive shoes, and he had found two pairs of shoes that he really liked. And I phoned Gavin. I walked outside quickly and phoned Gavin and said, just sort it out. And it was 19,000 Rand for the two pairs of shoes, and I paid for it. And well, my credit card wouldn't take any more, so that was maxed out then. Just said use your Bosasa credit card and just pay for it. So you'll see these type of things on my credit card slips. Then unfortunately, my statement doesn't run chronologically, but I see there when, this is important because when T resigned from Correctional Services, Gavin Watson, I was sitting with Doc Smith at the time. Gavin Watson came in and said he's just gone through Mti's new employment contract with 2010 FIFA World Organizing Committee, and he wanted to have a look at it. He was very proud of the matter. And a few weeks later, in Sondolo IT was appointed.
Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Agrizzi.
Yes.
My recollection from either your previous evidence or the evidence of other witnesses, I think your evidence, my recollection is that you said Mti left Correctional Services, I think, end of 2007.
I think it was 2007, 2008.
And the World Cup was in 2010.
That's correct.
So in the light of that, I wonder whether that first sentence is correct to say when T resigned as the Commissioner of the Department of Correctional Services, I recall Governor Watson coming to me to say he had just gone through his new employment contract with the 2010 FIFA Organizing Committee.
Chair, I remember it was before the 2010 World Cup because he was appointed into the organising committee.
Or much earlier?
Yes,
oh,
and I'll tell you why I know that for a fact. Because I assisted him drafting the security plan for the World Cup.
Okay. Because the organising committee, of course, existed much earlier.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And I remember it because I was called to a meeting where I had to draft the security plan for the World Cup with MT, and he still complimented me because he got a standing ovation in Switzerland, I think, where he presented it.
Yes. And who got the standing ovation?
MT got it.
MT. Okay.
I did the work.
Yes.
I did all the paperwork.
You did all the work?
I had to do it. I was instructed to do it by Gavin. So I did the presentation for him, and I still might have a copy of it.
Yeah. Okay.
So a few weeks later, after this appointment, then Sondola IT was appointed to set up the biometric and access control camera systems for the organising committee officers. So I remember because it was a problem a minute. There was no tender or anything like that, but it was a major problem because I remember that we had Danny Jordan would have to go and get in, and his biometrics wouldn't always work. So it was a constant running up and down to sort it out. So I remember it vividly as well.
Excuse me. Wasn't Mr. Mt's involvement with the World Cup Organizing Committee on the basis of him being employed as such, or was he bringing in a business and that he was going to get some business? I don't know if they did tenders, but or you don't know.
I think the pressure was too much in the press and with the SIU report that came out in 2009, that maybe that was the intention, I don't know. But there was he was working for them.
Yeah, yeah.
So he was working for Danny Jordan.
Okay. Okay, all right, thank you.
But then after 2010, MT at one meeting with Gavin Watson and myself was very concerned because of the SIU reports, and he had to show some sort of income into his bank accounts. So, and this chair is where this whole thing goes really bad, because now, like with my son, I've got to involve my brother. So Gavin Watson says to me, "Oh, but your brother's got a business. You must put MT there."
What was MT's request?
His request was that he gets employed by a company.
Was he out of the organization? Also after the World Cup?
Yes.
Yes.
So I was duped into this thing, and I took him to my brother, and my brother's, I raised him. My parents died when we were very young, so he stayed with me and went through schooling and that. So the problem is that now I was kind of in a stick, because I'm going to try and please the two gentlemen here, and I know my brother's not going to be happy with me because he's straight down the line and he's going to be upset. So MT went and had a look at the place, and I took him there. I said, "Well, Gavin,
this is your brother's place?"
Yes. It's at that stage, it was a small business. He started with a bit of help from me. Well, he actually started by himself, and then I helped him grow it. And it was a small business in the manufacturing, and he wasn't happy with me at all. And T just said, no, I want to buy a part of this business. And he wrote out 2 checks to make it look authentic. And Gavin was on my back to say, yeah, you must help him out, and your brother needs BEE to grow and all this. My brother wasn't interested. I don't even know if he cashed the checks. I don't think he did. But Gavin was very concerned that he had to keep MT, Gillingham, all these people content. Because the SIU report had come out now, and everybody was very jittery. And and Gavin knew that if MT and Gillingham turn on him, then, I mean, I could turn on him, he wasn't worried about me turning, but if MT and Gillingham turned on him, then he would be caught out as the main architect of everything. So he was very pressurized to keep them happy and content. So he would do anything to make them happy. So at a later stage, then I had to arrange a meeting with MT and the attorney to reassure MT that the process was under control and that he would be protected. So it was at that specific meeting that MT explained as well to the attorney, Brian Bibak, that he was told by Nonkoba Jiba to do a letter regarding the representation regarding the accused and why prosecution should not take place. So if you recall that letter that I had, the document and the handwritten notes, I'd made copies of that and given the originals to him, to Brian Bibak. And he then sat in that meeting and explained the setup of how this thing must happen to Brian Bibak. And based on that, a letter was drafted. Now, I'm trying to get a copy of the letter as well that was drafted, and that was after consultation. But it was at that specific meeting as well that MT said he had met with the lady, and that's what happened. So a further meeting then took place, which was Gavin insisted on at my brother's newer premises because he had moved premises, he had grown, and I'd helped him get another premises. Which was attended by Gavin Watson and Richmond MT, as well as myself. And it's where Gavin tried to coerce my brother into taking on Richmond MT again. But my brother, understanding the predicament I was in, I was sitting there, I had this looming case where I'm mentioned as the CEO in the SRU report, and my brother knew about it because we opened with each other, and he just skirted the issue until we left. And then I've made other testimony in the previous affidavit, I think, where I state that a payment needed to go to MT, but I had to go through my brother's company. And after one or two, he said, that's it. He's not doing this anymore for nobody, not even for me. I testified already regarding the documents I received from the MPA, and I handed those with the handwritten notes, the originals, to Brian Bibak. Brian Bibak then sought advice on the matter. Brian then produced a lengthy document addressed to the NDPP. It's dated the 28th of September 2010. So I recall that date.
That NDDP should be NDPP.
Oh, sorry.
No, just for the record.
Yeah, sorry, my apologies.
A criticism. Carry on.
This information, this representation made was pursuant to the meeting with sorry, Chair, am I talking loud enough?
No, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I was just told that I'm not talking loud enough. So this document was pursuant to the meeting with Brian Bibak and pursuant to them getting the documents from Advocate Jiba that Richmond and T had provided, and Advocate Jiba in the meeting he had with Jackie Lepinka, who was the secretary of Advocate Lawrence Murebi, who was the head of the Special Commercial Crimes Unit. And it was basically on that premise that I was constantly reminded that there's no purpose in me whistleblowing by Brian Bibak. I would be told, you want to go through that route, my boy, you're going to get nowhere. And I was constantly, every day I met and I mentioned it, I was reminded that don't even think of it. There's no protection for you. So there were several meetings also conducted with Gavin and Valence Watson, sometimes with Ronnie Watson as well, and Kevin Wakeford as well, where I was basically told, and this was at the 2010 period, 2011, where I was basically told, so there was meetings held where I was told, listen, there's a pact. You break that pact, you're on your own, and we'll deal with you. And that's probably why I'm getting threats at the moment. But the fact is, these meetings did take place, and I can recall on 2 occasions at the Michelangelo, that was the favorite spot at one stage. next to the, I think it's Piccolo Mondo restaurant. There's a lounge area with the water, with the fish in it, and the meetings would take place there. And I remember one occasion there was that Pastor Benny Hing was having a big conference here. So those are the timelines that I can refer to. And on another occasion, Morgan Freeman was in the country and he was staying there as well, I think. Well, he was there. And he was acting in a role of a movie that they were making. But I remember those vividly, and those meetings we were told, listen, if you do not stick to this story, we are telling you now, we'll sort you out. And it concerned me. That's why I stuck. But there was also numerous meetings that would take place at the residence of Mr. Valence Watson. He was living up here. I don't know why. He had a house here in Morningside with his sons. And occasionally, Kevin Wakeford would be called into those meetings as well. Kevin was always seen as the strategist of the Watsons. Sometimes I'd get a call to say, meet us at Tasha's in Morningside. If you go to Tasha's, they had their own table there. I suppose it was their table. Right on the end, on the left-hand side, towards the back, and I would have to have breakfast with them there. On occasion, the senior CEO Pella would be there as well. And the reason he was there, he knew the Watsons well. He knew Valence Watson. He went to gym with the kids. It even got to a stage where Gavin would buy him supplements and gym stuff and all that, all the vitamins and powders and all that stuff that they drink when they go to gym. I wouldn't know, as you can see.
Mr. Agrizzi, much of the evidence in paragraph 144 to 149 has already been touched on by you, either in your evidence in January or yesterday and today. Is there anything in those paragraphs you would like to emphasize before we move on to paragraph 150?
The one thing I think that's important is that myself, Andries van Tonder, Frans Forster, and even Carlos Bonifacio would be warned, not so much Carlos, that Gavin Watson had seen a photo of the dockets that was pursuant to the meeting he had with ex-President Zuma at Nkandla and with Joe Gumedi and the discussions Joe Gumedi had had with the Hawks. I just want to re-emphasize that. And he said his name's not on there. And you better toe the line, or else you're on your own. And that's what's happened. Sorry, Mr. Advocate Pretorius.
Perhaps you should just mention the roles that had been allocated to various persons in terms of what you've referred to as the Watson Pact, paragraph 149.
So this pact, Chair, was started and there were roles defined. So Gavin defined the roles. He would handle anything political. We would not to get involved with it. He would caucus. He would work with the senior CEO Pella and Richmond MT. And that's how they would caucus it. Because CEO Pella is very influential in the MPA and the Hawks and all that. So they would work that. In terms of the finances, getting bonds, getting any, dealing with the banks, Andries van Tonder was responsible for that. But one thing that Gavin insisted on is when you go and see FNB, who was the bankers, if you go and see them, because they would always raise queries, you take Kevin with you and you play this as a political attack on a BE company. And Kevin was a master at doing that. I mean, he had written all these books and he's a very intelligent man. So when he came into the meeting, the banks sat and listened. So that would often secure their confidence in the process whenever there was negativity. And of course, when he wrote the book, The Assault on the Rand, everybody sits up and listens when the man walks into the room. I would have to deal with make sure the operational business runs well so that nobody can ever say we did a bad thing operationally. So the business itself had to run well, the food had to be good, the security service had to be good and all that. But I also had to deal with the legal aspects. He did not want anybody else dealing with it. He didn't actually even want his family knowing about it. At that stage, Sonia Jonker was the attorney, and she was best suited to handle the legal. He said, no, you handle it. I want you to deal with Brian Biebuck directly, and you handle all legal aspects with Brian Biebuck, and you report back to me on it. So that was the pact. My responsibilities as well was to make sure that Patrick Gillingham didn't jump ship, and to make sure that Danny Mansell was kept happy overseas. It was given to me. I was told to do that.
You may have dealt with it before. In fact, I think you have, at least to some extent, but please deal with the evidence in paragraph 146.
146. Sorry, Advocate.
Paragraph 146.
This is... Whatever happened, Chair, Gavin Watson would always... He wouldn't sign anything. So he never had an office. He used to sit a lot in my office, and Andries' office, and he would sit in, I think, Colleen Pisano's office, sometimes later on, when he didn't trust us anymore. But he wouldn't have a secretary. He had no secretary. Gavin Watson would not sign anything. Nothing. Nothing would have his signature on. So he used to remind us. He used to say to us, you know, chaps, remember, my signature appears nowhere. My name appears nowhere. And he'd say, and this is what upset Andries van Tonder immensely, that he refused to go to these prayer meetings. One morning he would say, he says, you know, man, if they arrest us, we'd be like Paul and Silas praising the Lord in prison. And I used to say to him, yeah, Paul and Silas okay, but Paul and Silas and 48 others is where the problem is. So he thought it was a joke. He actually thought this whole thing would just not happen. And he was oblivious to it. He said, I've got everything under control. I'm not worried. Does that cover you?
Extract concerning Paul and Silas.
Yes.
You would have been aware of the context in which that statement was made by Gavin Watson.
Yeah, I was reminded.
And when he said
times.
that you would be in prison together, what did he mean?
He said that you would praise the Lord, sing, and then what happened to Paul and Silas is when they started singing and praising the Lord, the chains fell off and the walls fell, the doors opened, isn't it?
All right. I'll trust to your knowledge there.
I'm a good Catholic.
Well, Mr. Agrizzi,
Yes, sir.
I've heard from different witnesses, including yourself, that Mr. Gavin Watson did not have an office, did not have a secretary. Whenever
He once told me that some ANC stalwart taught him to remember everything. Chris Harney told him to remember everything. Now, I don't know if it's true or not, but he said, don't write anything down, you must remember everything. And he just didn't have an office. I mean, he would sit in my office. The only paper he had was the newspaper that he would read, and he would sit in my office, and people would come in and out of my office all the time and meet with him there. Or he would sit in the boardroom and people would go and meet with him there. Or he would have lunches and that type of thing. That was how he operated. He didn't have an office and he was proud of it.
But if I recall correctly, he was the CEO, isn't it?
Yes.
That would suggest to me that he would be spending a lot of time in the company, in the premises.
Well, he spent time at the premises, but normally at about 11 o'clock he would go out to his meetings.
Yeah.
So he'd go to meetings, while I was there.
Yes.
He would go to meetings, or he would walk around and go and sit in someone else's office and that type of thing. But there was an executive wing at Bosasa that was access controlled, and that was where he would spend his time, in there.
And that was like what, in a boardroom, like
Yes.
some empty office?
Yes, he would sit there was no empty offices, but he would sit in the boardroom.
Yeah.
Or he would come and sit in my office, or he would sit in Anish van Tonder's office. When Tony Perry was there, he would sit in Tony Perry's office quite a lot.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
You deal in paragraph 150 and following, Mr. Agrizzi, with
Yes.
circumstances related to Papa Leshabani.
Correct.
Please go through that.
Papa Leshabani had various roles in the Bosasa group. He was the spokesperson for Bosasa. He was the one who had to deal with political issues and news issues and things that came up. But he was also the head of human resources, so he had to look after human resources. He was also the head of Corona and Lindela, and he was also responsible for marketing. So they had started becoming very secretive of the alliances that they'd built up. You see, Chair, what happened was I started showing my feelings 2013, really. And they started to become very secretive over who they're dealing with and who they're speaking to. But sometimes they'd let slip, and sometimes they'd be open about it. And I remember with me asking questions, they didn't like that. So they started retracting all the information away, and they would deal with Gavin. You'd suddenly find that they'd been in the boardroom with Gavin, they'd come out, and I would get an instruction. So that type of thing would happen. They didn't like the fact that I was questioning where all this cash was going. So some of them, even one being Papa Leshabani, would go to Gavin directly and just say, no, I'm not dealing with Angelo, I don't trust him. And there was open, there was contempt, as I can put it, not only from his side, from my side as well, because often I would be annoyed because we'd get requests to pay hundreds of thousands of rands out for functions from the directors. I mean, I recall even at one stage the company was battling and we didn't have money. We're telling staff, you can't fly to go to a site, you have to drive there to Durban instead of flying. But then he was splashing out on jazz festivals because he was inviting politicians and people to jazz festivals and booking out boxes and that type of thing. And they were annoyed with me because at one stage I stopped the company from buying boxes at the sports stadiums. We had a box in every single sports stadium and it was costing a fortune. And that was what created some of the animosity, I believe, and why they started retracting and rather going to Gavin. And they knew if they said it was a political thing, they would get the money for it. And one such event that created a major problem was, and I was laughing when I saw our president said no after parties at Sona, was we actually paid for a full after party at Sona. There was a gentleman who owned a restaurant called Cubana in Cape Town. Now, I don't know which Cubana it is. I've never been there, but I believe it's called Cubana, and it's owned by the previous chairperson or DG, called a gentleman by the name of Chauke, because I remember Papa always used to refer to this gentleman, and we paid for the Sona, for everything. At this Cubana, the one, it cost us hundreds of thousands of rand. And those type of things I used to get upset about. So we would go directly to Gavin Watson to get approval for it, and I would just get the bill.
I understood from what you've just said that persons such as Papa Leshabani would not consult you anymore, but would rather go to Gavin Watson after the relationship had deteriorated. My impression from your evidence was that right from the beginning, they went to Gavin Watson.
A lot of the time. Well, yes, they would have to go to Gavin Watson with me, but then they started excluding taking me with and would go directly to him.
Right, and then in paragraph 155, please deal with that.
Well, originally what would happen is Brian Weber, because of the Corona contract, would go and fetch cash from Gavin to pay people at the Department of Transport. That was then taken over when Brian Weber left by Papa Leshabani and Pella.
Let me ask this, and I don't know if I asked it last time when you were giving evidence.
Yes, Chair.
Was there actually any contract that Bosasa got for which they didn't pay bribes?
No, Chair.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question, Chair.
Well, I was asking whether there was ever any contract that Bosasa got for which they didn't pay bribes, and the answer was no.
I see. You perhaps did mention the later contract which you testified about this morning, where you said you got that contract above board and for merit.
Well, it was above board and for merit, but the people were still getting paid in the department. It was continuous payments. I mean, Chair, I haven't even raised here because it's not a state capture issue, but I can tell you of banks that were duped by other companies within the group, but it's not a state capture issue. But I mean, I've sent them notices. I said, listen, guys, let me help you. I mean, where panels were put up, what do you call them, solar panels, where they used inferior panels, and my people had to make stickers. But that's not a state capture issue, so I haven't raised it.
Just one question in relation to Mr. Watson, Mr. Leshabani, and Mr. Gumedi.
Yes.
As I understand your evidence and the evidence of others,
Yes.
those three persons were the senior persons within Bosasa.
I would say that Joe Gumedi was the chairman of Bosasa. He was more dealing on the security side. He had the contacts in the Hawks and the police. And Mr. Papale Shabani knew the politicians very well, and they worked together. But then a pivotal person as well was Mr. Siopela, that did the liaison with the politicians. He wasn't employed by Bosasa. He never wore Bosasa uniform. The only one time I seen him wear Bosasa uniform was in a photo that was taken at Latuli House.
Yes, we'll come to Mr. Siopela in a moment. I just want to deal with Mr. Watson, Mr. Leshabani, and Mr. Gumedi.
Yes, they were the most
particular
influential.
Context.
Yes.
Those three persons were senior, or the most senior within the Bosasa group of companies,
Correct.
as officials or chair or CEO or in whatever capacity or role.
Yes.
When you were arrested shortly after the evidence you gave in January,
Yes.
those three were not arrested.
No.
It's an opinion at this stage, but it's consistent with all your other evidence. Is there any possibility whatsoever that those three persons were not integrally involved in the unlawful activities of Bosasa?
Those three persons were integrally involved in the unlawful activities of Bosasa.
And there's evidence to show that.
Yes.
Have you ever heard any explanation of why they weren't arrested?
I've heard rumors. I can't give opinion on that.
Let's deal then with paragraph 156. You deal there with Mr. Siopela. Tell the chair about those matters, please.
When I first met Mr. Siopela, we were having a breakfast with Danny Mansell, and Andres Fontondo was with me, and the Watson kids were with us, and Gavin Watson was there, and Papa Leshabane was there, and we were having breakfast at Tasha's. And in the corner there was the senior Siopela standing, and Gavin called him over, and that's when I first met him, and I was told how influential he was. He came from a stable where he was trained by Peter Bokaba, and he was a driver for him and a bodyguard for him. But he was extremely secretive over who he worked with. You could see he was trained up to keep his mouth closed and not discuss it. But I was well aware that he had met with various ministers. I knew he had access to ministers. You can see in the one video that was published by the press, which was after I'd left, in Mbizo, they referred to him as the commander, because he would command and deal with the various people. So Gavin always refers to him as commander.
What was the extent of the relationship between Gavin Watson and Mr. Pella?
No, extremely close. Exceptionally close. I mean, I mentioned in the first one, he even paid his brother one day, fell ill, and his brother had a heart problem. And I know the company made the payment to sort out his brother and pay for his brother and everything. So I remember that. Gavin even knew his mother and would speak to his mother over the phone and things like that.
Did Watson and Pella, that is Gavin Watson, ever work on bids or tenders?
No, most definitely. In the one video that was put out by the press, Gavin actually stands up in an imbizo and he actually calls Pella. He says, "Come up here." And Pella is never in the press. He doesn't like to be seen. He's always in the background. And he inadverted, you could see he wasn't comfortable in the video of coming up. And he says, "Now, Commander, tell them what we have to do at nights." And they talk about having to caucus tenders at night. And Joe Gumedi gets pulled in to the conversation. He says, "Yes, and Joe, we have to go around fixing up tenders with people at night because they've been submitted incorrectly." I was not at that meeting, but it was on the video.
Do you have any personal knowledge of money being transferred in cash between yourself or anyone else and Mr. Pella?
I would have to meet Pella. He would phone me and he'd say, "Have you got the payment ready for IDT's payment, for instance?" And I'd say, "Yes, I've got it ready. Where must I meet you?" And he would say, "Well, meet me at a garage or at a restaurant or whatever." But he would never take the money there. He would say, "No, we'd have lunch maybe." But then after that, he'd say, "Follow me." And I would have to follow him in his car. And he'd stop on a nondescript road. He was very clever. And he'd say, "All right, stop here." And then I would have to open my boot and I would have to give him the bags. And he always had a lot of junk in his boot, clothes and old T-shirts and everything. Then he'd move them aside, put them inside, and then put all the junk. It really looked bad, and put that on top of it. And I once asked him, I said, "So why do you do this?" He says, "No, if I get stopped, then they won't check my boot."
Right. You have given evidence previously in regard to the contents of paragraph 160.
Sorry.
Please just deal very briefly with paragraph 159, if you would.
159. Chair, Senior Pella was instrumental in arranging the very first meeting with Vincent Smith, where I was asked to accompany Gavin Watson. So it's actually a bit wrong that, because he was instrumental in arranging the first meeting I had with Vincent Smith. A previous meeting had taken place with Gavin Watson already. So the meeting I'm talking about here, the first meeting at the hotel where we went up the first floor and had the fishmonger food that Pella ordered from Nico. It's that one.
If you would then have regard to paragraphs 162 to 164, it's there on record, you've dealt with much of it. But please have a look at those paragraphs and then tell the Chair what you believe is important from those paragraphs, please.
Chair, I started calling Mr. Pella the 2.5% man, because the transactions would always be 2.5% of the value of the contract. So I knew I had to make a provision, and everybody, I mean, the people that worked in my bid office on the costings knew that 2.5% had to be added to the price, because that was the amount that would have to be paid out in gratuities or gratification. And what was interesting was that even though Basas had provided him with a company credit card, which he used, and a fuel card and access to Blake's Travel on the VIP account, sometimes he would hire cars on the company account to attend certain meetings. So he would never go in the same car. I was one day very upset because the company had to buy him a white S5 Audi Cabriolet. Not Cabriolet, sorry, S5 Coupe. And I got to the airport one day and I recognized the car and there was a layer of dust on it. And I I thought, why on earth would you park this car and not use it? Why hire a car and then park this car? Because I knew he was driving around in a C-Class Mercedes that was hired from Blake's Travel. I couldn't understand why he would do that. And then I started realizing that he didn't want to be tracked or anybody to see where he went. And this was important because, especially when large amounts of cash were being paid out, sometimes he would arrive in a Toyota Corolla or in a Mercedes. He would be very careful in which vehicle he would arrive in. You actually lost track of how many vehicles, but Blake's Travel and Avis will have the records of the different vehicles he had hired.
Was Mr. Pella in possession of information in regard to the progress of the award of tenders and the SIU matter and other matters relating to the business of Bosasa?
Most of the time. Chair, at one stage, every bit of information that I got, I would have to phone him and relay to him. And he'd always shout at me on the phone because I would use names. This person says this. So don't use names, use codes. So we started using code names for people. And what had happened was, when I got information, I would have to tell him. Or when myself, Gavin Watson were together with Sir Pella, we'd often have meet at lunches. Then I would say to him, this is what this person has said. And he would say, I'll check for you. And he'd come back to us and he'd say, yes, but this is not really how it was meant. And this is actually how it's happening. So he had a network second to none. I mean, I was walking in Sandton Square one day I was there myself. I went to go and get a Vodacom contract for one of the kids. And I remember bumping into him there, and he was with one of the, is it NDPPs? One of the NDPP. He was walking hand in hand with the guy. And he said, oh, do you know this person? At first I didn't recognize the person. Then he introduced me to the person. So he had influence. I mean, he's walking around Sandton City with this gentleman with no bodyguards or anything in the open, and introduced me to the person.
Let's move then to Mr. Gumede, if we can. You deal with him in paragraphs 165 to 167.
Yes.
Relate those passages to the chair, please.
The most important was Jonas Gumede was in charge of all the security aspects of the company, including security at head office, the AXA contract, the post office contract, and he was the head of security and also made the head of as the chairman as well. But more importantly, he fronted a lot for Gavin Watson.
Sorry, before you go on, when you say he was head of security, is that the security within Bosasa or security contracts of Bosasa or both?
Anything security related.
So outside contracts
outside and
as well
inside.
as internal security.
Correct. But he was also involved with Lindela. He was involved, these directors were involved in every aspect of the business. Joe Gumede also was responsible for the Employees Trust. And there were other companies, like side companies like Better Fence, like Nkonjani, Insabintle Mining, where Joe was put on the board by Gavin. And he held shareholding for Gavin via double agreements and that type of thing as well.
You mentioned earlier that you were introduced to the National Director of Public Prosecutions by Mr. Pella. Is that correct?
Yes.
Who was that?
It was a gentleman by the name of Menzi Simelane. I can't remember if at that stage he was, or he'd been moved, or I can't remember at that time.
Okay.
If he was still or he wasn't, but that was the level of influence.
Can we deal with the Department of Education?
Yes.
Northern Cape, Kimberley.
Correct.
Tell the chair about those matters, please.
Chair, one of the other directors, Trevor Matenjwa, who was the director of Sandola IT, he's the gentleman who was very close to Dudu Myeni. And this happened without my knowledge, and then I found out about it, and then I started confronting people about it. But we employed a technician called Becky Gina. And Becky Gina's sister works for the Department of Education in the Northern Cape area. That's what it's called.
When you say we employed, who employed?
Trevor
Mr.
Matenjwa.
Gina?
Trevor, I didn't employ anybody. I just was there, but Trevor Matenjwa employed him, and at that stage it would have been Papale Shabani, Jogamati, that would have signed off.
Did Matenjwa employ in his personal capacity or through a company?
No, it was through Sundolo IT that time.
Yes. Continue, please.
So basically, they tried to keep me out the loop, but there was a CCTV and an access control contract that was awarded to them for about 10.5 million rand at this stage. I was totally out of the loop. I know for a fact there was no tender that was prepared for it. It was an estimate, a cost, and it was forwarded, and there was no tender process, and it was made out to be an emergency requirement. I never flew down to Kimberley. The only time I ever went to Kimberley was when I went for a conference with a company. But this specific tender was kept far away from me, and it was during the latter part when I was just about to resign the first time. So,
well, do you know about it?
Yes,
it was far away.
Yes, I do. No, it happened while I was there.
Wasn't that far away?
No, it was there. It was Advocate Pretorius. What would happen is that things would happen, but I would always have to find out about them because I would also have to sign off the accounts.
Okay. Carry on, please.
So he approached me at one stage and mentioned that he had established a relationship with Becky Gina's sister, and that she held this portfolio, and that there were key departments. And the reason why he had come to me and spoken to me about it was because there were incidents where I actually wanted one of the operational personnel had reported to me that Becky Gina was not performing in the company. So I actually wanted disciplinary action taken. And that's when Trevor Matenjwa came to me and he said to me that, listen, you can't do anything there because his sister is this person, and we're working on this contract with the Department of Education. And he also then requested Bosasa to provide a bribe. He asked me
this personally?
Sorry.
Did he speak to you about that?
Trevor Matenjwa?
Yes.
Yeah, he did speak to me.
Yes. Okay.
You know, at that stage, he also said, we need to look after this woman. That was his words to me. And I said to him, I said, you know, there's protocols you have to follow. You've got to go speak to Gavin about this. And you should be dealing with Gavin if it's a formal arrangement for a large contract. I said to him, that's what you've got to do. And they were very, very elusive with this contract. They did not want me involved. But what I did establish was that we did do the installation because the client who the installation was done for ultimately complained vehemently and actually picked up the phone and phoned me one day and said that the systems are not working and he's paid for nothing and he's not happy about it.
So you were aware in relation to the Department of Education in the Northern Cape?
Yes.
That bribe money was requested to
and
facilitate the award of certain contracts?
Correct.
Do you know whether bribe money was actually paid?
Chair, there was an amount of 1.250 million that was paid out.
To whom and for what purpose?
It was paid out to the sister of the Gina, and Trevor Matenjwa managed the project and he handled the bribery there. I did not even pack it. I just knew that I asked them, but where did you make provision for it? And they showed me in the costings that they had made provision for administration of 1.2 million rand.
So
25 million rand.
The bribe money was included in the contract price?
It was always, yes.
As always?
Yeah, but it was reflected as an admin fee or as an extraordinary fee or something like that.
And what was the purpose of the bribe? What contract was involved?
Well, the contract that was directly involved that I saw was the contract to provide security and access control systems, and there was specifically bollards that were problematic for the client that needed to be installed as well.
Where?
At the Department of Education, the main building.
In Kimberley?
In Kimberley.
Was there other work provided for or provided by Bosasa in the Northern Cape?
Normally with a new contract with opportunity, I would be involved in it specifically. They excluded me on this one. I know that because what happened was there were flights arranged for Sunworks' people, which was another company which was owned 50% by Sondolo IT, which is a solar panel installation company. There was a deal done for the Department of Education as well for Sunworks. I was excluded from it, and it was around the time when I left. So I actually make mention that I know about it, and I'm sure the investigators will pick up on it, but I cannot vouch for the information.
Chair, it's almost 1 o'clock. We will finish today and hopefully earlier than 4 o'clock. But there are a couple of matters I would like to attend to over the lunch hour before the evidence is concluded.
Okay. Then we will adjourn for lunch and resume at 2. We adjourn.